EG is building champions, an empire for North America. And we have assembled a team that represents the best of North America. And we're going to do it our way. Fight us, and you will bleed. Evil still lives in North America. Remember, we are evil.
The Four Horsemen ride again, guys. We are here with the EG Files, round number 2. And rejoining us is Phil Aram, who has deep ties to the Evil Geniuses brand and organization, which he will get into. If you guys missed it, our last episode, we basically talked about the history of Evil Geniuses, which I know many of you appreciated because you guys were not actually around during that time period. So context on the EG brand was important. And when we basically hit it from inception of EG through the time in which they ended their Twitch ownership, and we're picking up this episode by talking about the time period in which they returned to kind of DOTA ownership, I would say. Phil will clarify that for us. And then we will actually end today with the Peak 6 acquisition, which was the latest and current ownership group. So we will not be getting into any of like Richard and Thorin's reporting on this episode. That's happening next episode. But it is more of an overview of EG's history. So Phil, do you want to talk about how you were involved with EG and as well your impressions of the brand prior to your engagement with it, like from the early days and what it meant in esports as well as through the end of the Twitch era?
I guess I'll start with the second part first, which was my
Sure.
experience and impression of EG. I got into esports when I was in college, 2008, 2009, somewhere in that range, and I think like this, all the seminal experiences are like EG StarCraft 2 at MLGs and like HC Husky StarCraft videos are like the things that I remember most about my like
Classic.
early esports days, especially, but related to like watching esports. It was all StarCraft 2, which all felt very like around about EG and like watching YouTube videos and just kind of being enamored with with them and the dramas, but the various dramas of them just like poaching players left, right, and center, and Alex being kind of a larger than life figure. I wasn't really a StarCraft 2 player though. Most of the guys in my that I lived with were, and so I primarily became a DOTA player and became a big fan of DOTA, which at the time especially was super China focused, and it was a lot of like downloading VODs on Gosu Gamers and watching like Chinese games as replay files at 7 a.m. But EG had a presence there, and there were some like kind of interesting epic battles, but it was not nearly as serious. That was back when Mykles was a player and like competing on EG at times. So a different world there, but that's sort of like my inception. And yeah, EG was to me like the big thing in esports because I kind of came in through that StarCraft 2 era. So that was really my entry point to like mainstream esports and like watching it on live streams and things. Because again, most of the DOTA was watching VODs, so there weren't casters, there weren't desks or anything. It was just looking at replay files. Yeah.
And also EG was one of the earlier adopters of DOTA.
Yep. This was
when
Warcraft
it came
3
to
DOTA.
support, Warcraft 3 DOTA, when it came to supporting the professional scene. And hilarious, you mentioned Belk, because that, I think his name is what, Jacob Toft?
Jacob Toft
Right?
Anderson. Yeah.
Jacob Toft Anderson, and he currently, he still works in esports. He's an executive, I believe, at 100 Thieves these days. He actually was. We talked a lot about Alex Garfield and his puppet organization Alliance. He was actually Alex's puppet king. Over
He had
at
to pretend
Alliance.
he was the one that like ran /owned Alliance or something, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So But he's been operating
Even though I
for a long
believe,
time now.
even though the Jokers, I believe at the time, like now he's obviously real exec, has been 100 Thieves, all those optic, etc. Right, but at the time, the joke was the Alliance players even used to be. I'm pretty sure he just plays Dota, and then we just like play League of Legends or whatever. Like, so I'm not even sure. Like, it really was like the equivalent of like a shell company. It felt like.
Yeah, I guess the puppet is a puppet masters or puppets are a good segue into my experience of EG on the working side because I was involved writing about esports, ESFI World, old NA-based publication, ran their Dota coverage in the very early Dota 2 days, and I went and after I graduated, stopped doing that, had to get a real job, worked in politics and in tech startups in Seattle. Stayed connected, and in 2014, Twitch starts blowing up. I reach out to people I know through ESFI times who are now working primarily at Evil Geniuses. And I was like, hey, if you have opportunities, I'd be really interested in like making this move full time to esports. And lo and behold, Alex at the time, this is 2014, it's post acquisition by Twitch. But Good Game is still doing kind of the like we own a bunch of things. And I was actually originally supposed to be getting brought on in about September of 2014 to run what would become Team Secret eventually in the Dota world. Originally, most people don't know this. Originally, Team Secret was in its infancy in talks with Alex and Good Game to have it fall under the Good Game umbrella along with Alliance and EG. And there was kind of an ongoing negotiation there. They had an existing manager. Good Game wanted to bring me in as kind of their in-house person to manage it and run it. And I think that I wasn't really involved in that at the time. I was still working in politics, but I was told it's like, hey, this is going to happen really soon. Like we're going to like get you in there. Don't worry about all these like things that are kind of not quite working or rubbing. But I left my job in September in preparation for that. And then in October, they're like, oh, this whole thing fell through. They're not going to become a part of the EG group. So that was actually my first one was a false start on the Puppet Master side. I ended up coming in and they brought me in for a different team that they decided to bring on and run. That team would eventually become the Mouse Sports EG team that year, but it was Team Tinker, like an unsponsored team for a while. But that was at that point where Alex and EG was still, they had all this marketing power under Good Game Agency. They were bringing in more sponsorship than they could really put under one team. If you have three energy drink companies who are interested in doing work with you, you can only put one on each brand. So why not just have three brands was kind of, I think, their philosophy at the time. So, they were just trying to fill inventory, and they were doing it by kind of, sort of being in control of these teams because they would usually send out someone like me to staff the team who is in-house and paid by them. And, they would do the sponsorships and take their cut, but it would all fall under a different group. So that's kind of what I ended up falling into was this Mouse Sports Dota team that would eventually become and failed in the qualifiers for TI that year. And that was how I moved into EG proper. So I was paid by EG and Amazon that time, even though I was working for Mouse Sports. And then once they didn't qualify, then I came on to the mothership and joined EG in the mainline brand.
And this is when Good Game Agency was still owned by Twitch, correct? So you were technically a Twitch employee?
Yep. So contractor, I think, actually, if memory serves right, still hold that against them. But yes, under Twitch and Amazon. So yeah, it was that 2014 period when I started, late 2014, and then 2015, early like April, May, somewhere in there is when I moved to EG. But the whole time, I'm being paid by Amazon, Twitch, under as a ownership of EG.
And so what was your involvement when we actually saw the switch away from Twitch? Because obviously, we talked about this on the last episode. It was very controversial, especially it really complicated Twitch's relationships with a bunch of the other professional teams because the pro teams thought that they were competing directly on the platform against the platform for players that they had partnerships with. And this basically froze the ability of EG's teams to acquire new players because they effectively could not be in competition via Twitch directive for players that other teams wanted, right? And this was one of the main catalysts that spurred the Dota team to kind of want the brand of EG to be released by Twitch because they couldn't go sign, they could, if there was a highly contested pro player, the EG could not go and sign that pro player. They couldn't outbid other teams.
Yes and no. You got a lot right. A little bit of it's off. So I came on after the acquisition by Amazon and Twitch of EG, and so I sort of arrived after, as the fallout was occurring, when Twitch put what we kind of call like the shackles on EG, is what a lot of us sort of thought about it internally.
The handcuffs. Yeah.
Yeah, and again, I came in after. I think when EG got bought by Twitch, Alex and Kevin Lynn and all those guys had an idea of like, we'll do all the sales for all the esports, and esports will kind of be like, underneath this umbrella of Twitch, and we'll sort of in-house it, which is not dissimilar to what Riot ended up doing within their own ecosystem, like in-housing a lot of it. So conceptually, they did something that wasn't crazy from what other people ended up doing. They just did it from an avenue that had a very low likelihood for success and created a ton of threat instead of opportunity for the other players in the space, the other team owners in particular. So I don't really have any strong feelings about it. I understand why their team owners were really frustrated by the situation, the conflict of interest. But yeah, so I arrived as the shackles were getting put on, and the shackles were really, it was like everything was in stasis. We were allowed to operate within the games that we were already in, but we couldn't add into any new games.
Right.
If we were in a game currently, we could make roster changes, and we could offer competitive salary. So that's the one piece that I would tweak.
You couldn't
what you said.
majorly outbid another team, though. Isn't that true?
I mean, at that point in time, EG was DOTA, a few StarCraft players who didn't compete anymore or barely competed, a strong fighting game roster, and I think we lost a Call of Duty team as we got acquired, and then weren't able to get them. We weren't able to go back in, and we were out of league after that point. So it wasn't a whole lot to Evil Geniuses by and large at that point. So it was, from a team game standpoint, it was by and large the DOTA team, and whether or not the DOTA team could go after talent. And it was Wild West in DOTA. I mean, most people didn't have real contracts. People were poaching people in the middle of tournaments, ourselves included. So I would say by modern standards, like if that rule had been in place, it probably would have had a big impact. But by like 2014, 2015 esports standards, it didn't really impact a lot. Like you're paying somebody $5,000 a month is like outbidding. So it wasn't, from
That's
Twitch's
true.
standpoint, I don't think it was crazy. Now, if we'd been in league still, I think at that point, that probably would have been more like that kind of control, bit more impactful.
League salaries didn't really crank up until 2016.
That's
Like
fair too.
100K in league was very high.
That was
up
like a
until,
Bjergsen salary way back
2016.
then.
Yeah.
That's
exactly. Here's a question I have, though, Phil.
You were
Oh, go on.
I was just gonna say you were trying to get into CS though, right? At that time.
So when I came on 2014, 2015, I knew what was going on organizationally, but I was very focused on the DOTA side of things initially. So yeah, what I understood primarily was everybody is fucking pissed that Twitch has like done this deal and then walked back days later saying you can't do anything with the brand. So yeah, I think EG wanted to get back into CS, wanted to be a player in the league space, wanted to do all these things. And all of a sudden it was like, hey, you can't do anything with the brand. You just have what you have right now while we figure this whole thing out. And it was just, I think it was just incredibly frustrating for everybody involved.
Yeah, the reason I bring that up is because obviously there's a little detail that people might forget about the obviously the iBuyPower bans, which was Alex had dispensed, I think it was Kelly Mykles, obviously who was a manager over at Alliance, to kind of go, and they wanted to pick up the iBuyPower guys, and it was going to be iBuyPower, but with Hiko added into the lineup.
Yeah.
And obviously this is prior to the ban coming down the pipe. I think the original plan was to pick them up for like X Games or whatever tournament it was that was happening. Or they might have been at X Games, and that was where the negotiations.
They played in the qualifier, and I believe they
Yeah.
even did something like make the name like a cheeky reference to they might be evil, like some sort of inference. And by the way, if people don't know, obviously Richard knows very well that Kelly Mykles is friends with Hiko. That's burned into his mind in many ways.
Yes,
Thanks to a
I
certain
do,
incident.
Duncan.
That's some deep lore, in case people don't know. No, the question I
Yeah.
was going to ask Phil was, since, as you say, the DOTA team, even if to the fans, they don't really understand the workings of the industry, this is sort of like inside baseball stuff that like EG couldn't operate beyond that. The Dota team obviously had a fantastic legacy and had some of the greatest players of all time and routinely would make the playoff runs at TI. So the question I would have for you is, what do you do when you basically, like normally in an org, it makes sense as to why you're trying to make teams succeed, because then you want it to have a knock-on effect to everything. You get more sponsors, you build it out, you expand. What do you do in that scenario where, like, essentially, even if you'd won like 5 TIs in a row, wouldn't you sort of still being capped to some degree? Doesn't that sort of set a limitations to what your ambitions can be?
Yeah, I think that, for the Dota team, I think that they were less overall concerned. I mean, in those early days, in 2014, the team really came up in 2014. TI4 was when they got top 3, like first big finish for North America in Dota. TI5 was when they win, but kind of in that year between those two, before they win TI, I think they were, for the most part, fairly comfortable. While there was stasis, they still had access to, Twitch's coffers. So boot camps were widely available. Like, food budgets were, pretty lavish compared to the competition in the space at the time. So I think they were, as a unit of players, relatively happy. But organizationally, everyone absolutely felt that. You're trying to build like an MGO, like a multi-game organization. You want to 100% use that springboard and the revenue that can come in from sponsors and from prize pool to help you get into other spaces. And you have to, especially for most of these orgs, you're trying to diversify your portfolio at some level to try and make sure that if one game goes down and the other's coming up, that you're positioned to be strong in kind of what the new big games are going to be, especially at that time where there was more uncertainty about longevity of a game or how big and lasting games could be. So I think,
unless you're Team Liquid and then you publicly disavow League of Legends and then end up selling half of Team Liquid to Curse because you refuse to get a League of Legends team. We all had different approaches back in the day.
For sure. But yeah, up before TI5, I'd say the Dota team was relatively happy with the situation. It's post TI5 where that all shifts. And the Dota team and myself were more actively involved in being dissatisfied and unhappy with kind of where things were potentially heading.
Another thing I heard at that time, and this obviously specifically pertains to Dota, so I don't know if you can talk about this or even have any insight into it, but the other thing I got told was one of the things that precipitated the sale to Twitch was that Eric Johnson had told Alex directly they weren't going to tolerate having this Alliance, Evil Geniuses, potentially Team Secret collective ownership deal. And Alex believed that if Twitch were the parent company, Valve would have less of an issue with it being a potential conflict of interest.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was core to the logic. I totally believe that Eric Johnson would have had a conversation with Alex at a LAN somewhere randomly and been like, I'm the boss and I don't like what you're doing and I make all the rules. So, we're not going to let you do this in the future. That's pretty consistent with kind of the way they've approached multi-team ownerships and conflicts of interest in their spaces. Like, they don't like it. They tend to take a slight, they're not usually immediate hardlining on it, but they usually are like, hey, like, you need to figure this out because we don't like it. And we'll make it hard for you later on if you don't figure it out. So I don't know the exact details of it, but it doesn't sound like something that's unreasonable. I do think that a lot of the impetus for that original sale was the ambition of wanting to grow and make EG and Good Game, really thinking Good Game. Like, it was all about Good Game to me. And they wanted Good Game to, to continue to scale and be this power partner with Twitch to really like expand esports and also bring all of esports in under their umbrella. So I just think they had really aggressive ambitions, and maybe some of it didn't quite match up, but that could certainly have been a component of it. Twitch was certainly a partner they saw as both monetarily and structurally someone who could have the strength to give you the ability to kind of go for those things. So again, makes sense. I guess we're probably saying the same thing, I guess, a little bit. Like, you're thinking the 3 teams, I'm thinking of like 30, and they're like,
right,
3 or 30, that Twitch gives us the cover to do it, right?
Yeah, from like the boots on the ground kind of perspective, obviously I was reporting on all of this at the time, and I as I said on the previous episode, I had stopped a exclusivity league in 2014 for CS, which was going to involve Evil Geniuses, potentially Alliance. Twitch housed the meeting at their offices. They were obviously going to be involved in some capacity. There was that betting site Vulcan were involved as well. CLG were there, TSM were there, you know. And I'd stopped that in 2014 by exposing it was happening. And they deliberately did it when Valve were on their like annual holiday to Hawaii. Because they were like, if Valve aren't around to stop us, then we can totally just do this shit.
And then purge zone for all esports.
Yeah, classic, right? And then I covered subsequently the Good Game acquisition, which was basically through the lens of, have they bought a talent agency, and if so, will that be in violation, in the state of California because they don't have the appropriate licenses? So I was kind of like, I couldn't see the end game, which, having talked to Alex subsequently, it's like you say, I think he just wanted to be at Twitch and essentially running a bunch of teams and by extension, the players, which he was super passionate about. But like you say, it wasn't just 3 or 4 or 5. It was going to be like, 24 to 30 or even more if he had his way.
Yep. It was an ambitious
Well,
idea.
you understand like why the other team owners were shitting themselves, because this is before they had taken venture capital or made partnerships with, later on we saw, of course, like, oh, Shaq is investing in NRG and like all of these other announcements. Obviously, Peter Guber getting very involved with Team Liquid. So you had traditional sports owners and, major executives from other industries like popping in. We saw this all over the place, right? Andy Miller coming in, who was a VP at Apple. And like, who else? Like Rob Moore, who is the president of Paramount, the film production company, who is now running Sentinels, right? So there were a lot of people who kind of showed up later, either to invest or to take leadership roles within esports teams, kind of, I would say, after they retired from their main jobs, right? Even though Andy Miller is also still a partial owner of the Sacramento Kings, the NBA team, I believe. Or before this professional sports teams themselves invested, right? Because, like, for example, Dignitas is owned by Harris Blitzer, who now owns the Washington Commanders. And there were these, FlyQuest is owned by the same ownership group that owns the Florida Panthers in the NHL. So, there were big money entities that started coming into this space. And I think a lot of the owners prior to having the ammunition themselves were extremely afraid of what this meant for Twitch. And obviously with the ambitions here. And I think Alex knew that the writing was on the wall and that you needed to take money from somebody, because there was, I think, a legitimate fear that if esports got too big, the pro sports teams and other investors would just swoop in, create their own teams or extensions of their professional sports team brands, and then destroy everybody with money. So it was better to just like find a strong ally than to try and like go, one-on-one versus these sports teams. Now, what was unreasonable is the fact that they actually did need people. Like it ended up that we needed, endemic people to help guide these. And I can tell you, even from my consulting with some of the sports teams that founded Overwatch League franchises, they were not interested in not having esports irrelevant people on their roster. Like, for example, I talked to Jonathan Kraft, who is the son of Robert Kraft, who owns the Patriots. And his main focus was finding somebody very like trustworthy and who he liked in the scene to run the team. And that was Huck, right? That ended up being Huck. Who ran, the Boston Uprising team in Overwatch for a number of years. But they weren't a lot of these sports owners were not out there to try and make it themselves. They ended up actively looking for the right people. But you can understand like the terror at the time of the professional teams with far less money, who are grassroots organizations, suddenly encountering, the Twitch-owned Good Game agency Amazon behemoth. And also, it has to be said, even before Amazon and Twitch took this over, they were already losing to Evil Geniuses. Evil Geniuses, as Phil said, had so many sponsors, they had to keep making new teams to make more money. Like it was an embarrassment of riches. Meanwhile, these other teams are just like begging for one fucking sponsor, and EG has all of them.
Yeah, Alex was something else back in the day. a visionary. And yeah, I think your point is really important as well. Alex and those guys did believe that traditional sports were just going to come in, make their own versions, and stomp all the esports teams. I think the approach is really what the issue was. Like Twitch acquiring just evil geniuses out of the gate sets a power imbalance for everybody else. Because if the idea is Twitch eventually is going to own all these teams, and it's, well, you call it ownership, but like if you think about it more like a franchising sports space where like in traditional sports, a third party creates a league entity and you have a bunch of different participants, right? Not really what Riot does where they kind of give a token to everybody, but it's really still Riot's thing. Like the idea of this collaborative space, like you need to get everybody involved at the start, not pick one group to be the, like, you know, the driving force of it, and then put everybody who's already on the back foot with EG and feels a power imbalance with Alex. Yeah, so just a messy situation, but conceptually
they were already super jealous of EG, and now they had, you know, beforehand they couldn't fight EG because they were just getting their ass kicked. But now they could basically band together and issue grievances to Twitch, and, you know, play the victim here too. Right. And Twitch at the time, you'll be wondering like, oh, well, why did Twitch need to deal with the professional teams? Well, it's because the professional teams had the most popular streamers at the time. This was when esports, particularly in North America, was driven. You know, we've seen the decline in viewership of the LCS over the years. Check my YouTube channel.
Increase in spring split 2024. Thank you very much. Great job, Mark.
To Phil's point, I would encourage you to check out my latest YouTube video where I talk about how those are Brazilians and not actually North American viewers. But, you know, it did increase. I grant that an average viewership to Phil. Now, who those people are they valuable to North American sponsors? You can watch my video and be the judge of that.
We value all viewers.
Sailing close to the sun on that one, I would say. I admire your bravery.
But in any case, yeah, the viewership has gone up. But I think a lot of you have to remember at the time, for those people who may not understand why the professional teams were so necessary, it's because they did have many of the most popular streamers in the world, right? You know, TSM was incredibly popular in terms of streamers. And that was actually what was driving the huge viewership back in the day. In the early days of LCS, it was very similar to how Valorant is now, where like Tens is a huge Valorant streamer, and he also happens to be on Sentinels, right? Like that is very major for the Valorant scene. You know, a lot of the most famous streamers in the world came out of esports. Like, where do you think XQC came from, guys? He was an Overwatch League player. And the league scene had such a giant stranglehold on the streaming platform that at the time there weren't like independent streamers. The best streamers were also the professional players, which helped LCS viewership significantly. But it also, I think, gave the teams very big power in this power struggle with Twitch, because the threat to leave to another streaming platform was serious at that time.
Well, I mean, look, on top of that, you know, I guess my question, Phil, would be, what's your thought process while you're kind of facilitating this? Because I don't know, like my gut reaction always, like, and again, I said this on the previous episode, was like evil geniuses, Alex Garfield, Twitch. This was all going to be very destructive in terms of what it would do to the long-term esports landscape. And it kind of made me in this weird, I disagreed with a lot of their methods, like Jack and Reggie and to a lesser extent, well, obviously Steve, and to a lesser extent George, when they kind of bandied up against Alex and evil geniuses. But initially out of the gate, I kind of agreed with them that, yeah, this was completely impractical for Twitch to ever do, to actually own teams. It seemed like just obviously not, your other business partners aren't going to acquiesce to this.
Yeah. Again, I have a lot of empathy for the situation that those guys were in. I also was in the trenches with all the EG people who who really fucking cared about EG and the like brand they had built and the team they had built, and feeling these teams like, you know, what I think internally felt like exploiting the situation to like undercut and chop EG out at the knees. You know, I think there was a lot of understandable bitterness on one side and a lot of understandable like concern and response from the other. Like, you know, I came in after the kind of the shots have been fired from both sides. And really just had to figure out like how do we get out of this was really my job, was like how do we navigate away from this situation to keep EG alive? Because kind of the realities after that TI5 situation, and especially before TI5, if the team hadn't won TI5, who even knows what would have happened? There was certainly a world where Twitch just swallows it and just shutters EG to deal with the issue. What we felt with post TI5, with the value of the team being really strong, because again, let's say TI5 goes poorly, you have a Dota team. I forgot, we have a Halo team that was not very good, but may have had Ninja on it at the time or shortly thereafter for a short. I think he didn't come on.
I forget
until next year.
I forget if you guys
minute.
if you had Ninja before or after I did on Renegades.
We sold Ninja we sold his contract to Luminosity because to Luminosity.
Right.
So we were the last step before Luminosity.
All right, so
and that was because
after Renegades.
after an early career controversy for him, but yeah, so we were after, but yeah, so we were a Dota team that if it went poorly is just a Dota team. We were a Halo team that was at a time when Halo was not very big at all. It was on the decline. We were a bunch of StarCraft players who didn't really play, and we had some really good fighting games players, and that was like kind of what the whole team was. So if Dota goes bad at TI5 in your Twitch and you're dealing with all these headaches and all these conflict of interest concerns, there's a real world where they're just like, yeah, fuck it, like let's just ditch it. But of course, Dota wins TI5, is now the first North American team esport to like win a true global championship with 3 continents competing, and the biggest prize money esports history, all that sort of jazz. The value of the Dota team is now enormous, and thus EG's value is now like been inflated by this single property, even though the rest of the brand is in such disarray from a competitive and like eyeball standpoint. And that really shifted the calculus, and immediately kind of the internal conversation is, well, they're going to try and spin it off to somebody else and sell it to somebody else. And this again was still before most of anyone else had started taking investment or ownership. It was right at the beginning of that in late 2015. We're kind of pre-franchising for LCS, but it's all that sort of is building in that direction in that period of time. So we're looking at, okay, well, they're going to try and ship us off somewhere else. We kind of like it here individually at the Dota side. Like we kind of like it here. We have we have quality salaries. We get good boot camps when we want them. Things a lot of teams don't have. So our biggest concern coming out of that was not the Reggies versus the Alexes kind of situations. It was, well, like what's best for this Dota team and what's best for our future, and how do we take this championship and not end up just being an asset for Twitch to capitalize on as they try and go out to market. So that was our thinking coming out of TI5. And again, it was very focused on just the Dota team and like what's best for us. How do we make the most of this opportunity after winning TI?
Since I am not, Dota is like the major esport that I am the most illiterate in. Can you contextualize the TI win? And like, was this something where they were a heavy favorite going in, or what was the expectations for that roster at the start of TI5?
So the entire season for TI5, they were kind of the bridesmaid. So Team Secret that year had been just well, first off, they had taken Arteezy, our most popular player, the most popular streamer, like this huge personality. They'd taken him and taken Zai, like our 2 youngest superstars, and had made a super team. And they went on and won. Like they were like Astralis during that stretch, or Team Liquid during that stretch, and Counter-Strike, or like those periods where there's like one team that's just dominating every tournament. They just can't lose. They're going to everything. They wipe the floor with everyone. And EG was the team getting wiped. Like EG was good, had a very solid roster still, even before and after the roster swaps, but they were consistently finishing second or third. After our tour left, we picked up Sumail, and I know Richard's written a lot about Sumail as well in there, but when we picked up Sumail, he was like 15, and they like bombed out of the first tournament with him. It was like a huge controversial pickup. He was a no name in the scene. Bombed out of the first tournament. Everyone's like, the team's falling apart, and then they won the DAC, Dota Asia Championships, and that was the first like non-TI $1 million plus tournament that had a crowdfunding element to it. So they
Hmm.
win the second tournament with him. He's the MVP, has some crazy like comeback games and things, and like really makes a name for himself. And everyone's like, okay, so EG is like now maybe they are really good, but really they then went for the next 2.5 months before TI and just got flattened by Secret again every tournament that they played against each other. So they went into TI being like a top 3. It was like them, LGD, kind of the top force in China, and Team Secret. But Team Secret was a full step above, like presumptive favorites. If you're on betting markets, it would have been like Tiger Woods in the early 2000s PGA Tour level. Like you take them over the whole field in the odds
Got
at
it.
the time. So that was kind of where it was. They were top 3, but yeah, huge gap.
All right, thank you. So it was a surprise win in the end. Like even though they were a top team, this was the Team Secret was heavy favorites. So what was the reaction within Twitch to this victory?
A lot of you got lucky you didn't have to play Secret. Valve put us on opposite group stages, and then we were on opposite sides of the bracket, and then they fell down and got knocked out before we ever saw them. So we had some good fortune there. I think it was a well-respected win. Like people didn't think we were, it wasn't a shocking win, right? Like we had won the biggest tournament in esports history prior. Like DAC had just happened a few months back, so it wasn't like shocking. We were the other really good Western team, but yeah, I mean, the first half of that TI was people talking about what happened to Team Secret. Like now that they're gone, like they fell out really early. Like there's a power vacuum, who's going to step up, and it was kind of like EG versus LGD. This like China versus America thing was kind of the presumptive story. So, but out of it, people I think were really impressed. Sumail was best player in the world. Everyone just kind of like lauding over him. PPD best captain in like Dota. Is he the best captain ever? That was kind of the talk coming out. So it was, yeah, people had a lot of respect for the win overall.
All
when
right.
do we want to jump ahead and talk about the when Twitch decided to jettison the
Right
project?
now.
Are we there
But
yet?
before
No, okay.
Richard, but before we do that, let's talk about our sponsor for this episode, guys.
Who aren't gonna jettison us ever?
Who are never going to jettison us because you guys support us so well by supporting our sponsor. That's right, it's Factor. Phil talked about how EG had a competitive advantage in signing players because they gave them better food. Well, you too can have a competitive advantage by selecting Factor instead of going and getting takeout, guys, all the time, which is both less healthy for you and more expensive. Why not just have Factor deliver never frozen, fresh, ready to eat meals to you that are cooked in under 2 minutes? So easy. Just get them in a box every week. They have calorie smart options, keto options, protein plus, vegan, vegetarian options, bunch of add-ons, snacks, drinks, everything that you can get put in your box every week. So you can get those chef prepared meals. And they also have gourmet options. So premium ingredients, filet mignon, shrimp, truffle butter, broccolini, asparagus. Great stuff. Thank you very much to Factor for sponsoring us here at Last Free Nation and on the Four Horsemen. So if you guys appreciate the work that we do on the Four Horsemen, head to factormeals.com/horsemen50. That's plural, horsemen50. And use code horsemen50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box. That's code horsemen50 at factormeals.com/horsemen50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box while your subscription is active. So thank you very much.
Everyone already bought it as well. That's why we've been able to get the renewal on this. So yeah, it's good.
Yeah. Thanks. Thank you guys.
The S tier live read is why the working in the topical conversation.
I'm only half as good as Thorin, so we make do when I do them. But Thorin's the real ace. So Phil, let us now transition to the exit. So what prompted Twitch to finally say, okay, so this win is huge, kind of re-legitimized EG in a way. Maybe Twitch was, in fact, unhappy about this win in certain ways. Because perhaps they could have spun down the brand or gotten rid of it sooner. Now they had kind of this continuous problem. So what was the change that caused Twitch to kind of be like, okay, Dota team, you guys can go spin off and EG's yours now?
Yeah. So kind of the scuttlebutt post TI5, I was very much in the weeds, mostly on team management stuff up through and pre TI5. I knew the people on the senior management side. And so had those conversations and kind of got the rumors, but I wasn't in leadership meetings at that time. As soon as TI5 happened, the conversation, I think, for me internally shifted to, well, they're trying to spin this thing out. I think it was probably a spin it out or spin it down situation. They're like, well, let's, of course, go do the due diligence, see if we can get someone to buy it so we can recoup our cost. If not, maybe we just kill it. And as soon as TI5 happens, the conversation immediately becomes, well, they're going to spin it out. Like, there's this huge asset, e.g. DOTA team. We're going to go turn this thing, for a profit, or at least we'll be able to get our cash back and get someone else to buy it because it's got value. And so within the DOTA team, our conversation then became, well, our contracts are coming up, in September, October, usually right after TI is when contracts end. We don't want to be a part of an org that is like going to have new ownership randomly. We don't know we don't want to sign long term to then find out that we have new owners. We know we're going to have new owners. Like, we don't want to be in that situation. So Charlie, who was the original DOTA manager and who I came in assistant managing for TI5.
Charlie Yang, right?
Charlie Yang, yeah. And
yeah.
He's an agent now and worked at Luminosity and Loaded and all that stuff at various points. He was transitioning to full in-house stuff with Good Game Agency. And so I was coming post TI5 as the full-time manager of the team. And we had this big negotiation. So it's a weird situation, that period of esports, especially, where I'm the manager of the team. I'm paid by Amazon Twitch, but I'm also I'm the person with the team. And I'm Charlie or I always kind of took the approach of being we're there with the players. If the players go to a new team, you go with them. It was pretty common at that point. If you were a lot of times the manager went with the team and it didn't matter who your sponsor was, you traveled along with them. So it's a bit of that situation. So I was married to the team more than EG at this point. And we're talking about, well, how do we, set ourselves up? Because we don't want to end up in some random place. Peter was really ambitious, especially at that time. And he saw the value that they had created and, had started wanting to build around, his
Peter
own
is
brand.
PPD for those people who don't know. Sorry, I was trying to keep
of
my
the
context as we go along.
Yes,
right.
I appreciate it. So PPD, captain of the DOTA team, he's super ambitious, and he doesn't want to he's really, really averse to the idea of getting sold to new ownership and having to deal with new owners he doesn't know. So, we basically kind of start talking, and we're talking to Twitch, and we're like, hey, we don't want to sign a long-term deal, but Twitch knows they need to sign the DOTA team to a long-term deal to do a sale, because if you try and sell with the value of the DOTA team and the DOTA team's not actually signed long-term, then you don't actually have value to sell. So what I came up with was a backdating contract strategy, basically, which was to say that that DOTA team after TI5 was never under contract with EG. We allowed ourselves to play out of contract so that they could never put us on the table as an asset for them in a sale operation. And that was in part at the time. Originally, we were saying, well, we'll keep playing for you, keep paying us our salary, but we'll backdate everything. So we'd wait 2 or 3 months, and then we'd sign a backdated contract to cover the previous 2 or 3 months with EG. And so we kind of did this dance with them for quite a while. And, a part of the push was to go start our own team. PPD and the original EG squad had been before they joined EG, had called themselves Sad Boys, in line with the Swedish rapper, and that was a thing that the community really associated with them. So there had been a lot of talk about, well, we could spin off, we could not re-sign with EG, we could walk, we could start our own brand. This is a time when TSMs and all these other groups are starting their own team things as well. We could do our own thing and just leave EG because we're all the value of EG anyways.
Sure.
And sponsors might come with us. So we spent a lot of time trying to work on that, thinking about that and considering it. And in the meantime, EG or Twitch is just stuck with this thing that's kind of toxic for them that they can't sell because we're not willing to help them sell it. And that is really, 6 months of that on was when the conversation shifted from figuring out how to get through this impasse to, well, why don't you just divest it back to us and give us control over who becomes the ownership eventually.
And this just worked? Twitch had just had enough at this point in time? Is that?
I mean, again, we didn't finalize the sale until December of 2016. So we spent, most of my job, aside from traveling the DOTA team, was negotiating this for 15 months. So it was not a short process. It started as a little bit of a push and pull around, they really wanted us to sign a long-term deal, and eventually it shifted to, well, let's pick out the reality here and start moving towards a world where what does it look like if you guys become owners? How does that work? How does everybody get value out of like a sale like this? And yeah, that it evolved, but Twitch eventually came around and said, okay, we'll work with the Dota team. We'll divest it back to you. We'll also divest back to the Alliance side, back to the Alliance players, as a side piece of it. They were involved, but we handled our own negotiations completely separately, so I don't really know their side of the story or what their situation was. But yeah, once we had kind of pushed them on that was the direction it ended up going. And yeah, it took a long time to work out, but that was I think it all made sense to everybody involved because the position we took, like they just couldn't sell it without us. So.
I understand that like we're probably gonna get a little bit into NDA territory, so I was gonna ask this question, and you can answer it as much as you like. Were you happy with what you negotiated with them in the end?
Well, was I happy? We had a few agreements with them coming out of it. On the one hand, I was happy because we got to keep the Evil Geniuses brand. Again, having been very close to Alex, Charlie, Kelby, all these people who've been around EG for a long time and who were my people, and I, having grown up caring and loving EG, I cared about the EG brand. I didn't want it to die. I didn't want it to go away, and felt a lot of I felt a lot of pressure to want to just keep the thing alive. I used to always talk about just keeping the ship afloat. We were just trying to keep EG from disappearing off the face of the earth after, in such a sad way. So, well, didn't really, ended up in a sadder way somehow, but
that's esports for you. Every time you think it's at its bottom, it somehow gets worse.
Yeah, there's always more rocks below. So yeah, the deal we did with Twitch, it was a mixed bag. We got ownership of this brand EG. We got access to all the existing sponsors. We acquired all those assets and carried everything over. But it was messy. They only wanted to deal with the Dota team. We were the ones with the power and the leverage. Again, the rest of the divisions at that point were either latent or relatively weak in terms of value or anything like that. And it was really our leverage situation that created this in the first place. They're well, we'll just deal with you guys. We don't want to complicate it. You can figure out stuff after the fact if you want to. But we did that deal. We signed a deal with Twitch to stream on the platform, which was really common at the time. So that was we got a solid deal. It wasn't a great deal, I don't think, not compared to the TSMs of the world who had just crazy deals at that time that are kind of well understood now. And were sort of albatrosses eventually for Twitch. But we had a solid deal. We had our sponsorships. I think the toughest part was we had to agree to let Twitch do our sales, which was effectively letting the good game people do our sales, but it was a bit experimental, and that was kind of one of the value prop pieces for them. And then they had the ability to recoup some stuff if we went and flipped the team to a buyer later on, which was understood as a part of the process of, we always knew investment was coming into the space. We would have to sell the team as soon as it was divested to us. It was a running clock to figure out who we could find investment with before time ran out, basically, because everyone else is getting investment and you're going to get crushed by teams if you don't have an investor.
What was there some sort of provision where Twitch would get part of that buyout money? It would be common for them to say okay, you guys go do your own things, but if you take investment, we get part of that money that comes in.
What you're describing are warrants, where you do not have an active ownership stake, but you have a ability to gain financially from a future sale. I will not comment on that, but warrants are a common piece of contracts. Yes. So, but yeah, we were completely independent, had total autonomy over our operations and 100% autonomy over our choice of who we sold to. So there was, when the divestment happened, it is as true a divestment as could be. We had, business relationships with Twitch through sponsorship and through streaming, but those were the only, relationships, and those were the same that any other team had at that point.
Was there ever any sort of intimation, whether this is just a fucking over a beer or something was there ever any intimation maybe one day Alex Garfield might come back and he'd pick it up again or take over again, anything like that?
Yeah, during this period, there was a big falling out within Twitch between Alex and Twitch. He was understandably, I think, livid about coming in with these high-minded ideas about what they were going to do together, and then getting completely railroaded and having the most powerful brand in the entire esports industry just get like shut down, and losing all of his ability to direct it. I think it affected him a lot, but he was in his own kind of protracted battle with Twitch about how to get himself out. And they at the time, I think, were very adamant that they did not want a world where Alex somehow got out of Twitch and got back to being the owner of Evil Geniuses. Nothing in our agreements had anything to do with that, but I think he probably had some of that stuff during his dealings. I don't think any of that stuff is likely to have any bearing anymore. I would bet if he wanted to, he could buy the current Evil Geniuses as it stands. But yeah, I mean,
in its current state, I can't imagine it would go for very much.
Yes, could be a good bargain. But it was, at the time, it was understood that Alex couldn't really be involved in the process during the divestment. Nobody who had been a part of the acquisition was allowed to continue on. That was one of the scariest things for us, and it's one of the reasons why I ended up being the leader of the divestment process. It was because I was running the Dota team, but it's also because I was running the Dota team and joined after the acquisition happened. So I had no equity or anything in Twitch that made my participation messy. So that was all. Those were all challenges. All the existing people didn't come over. When we divested, we didn't get any of the good game staff. We didn't get any of, only a couple of like player managers were really allowed to transfer over with their teams. Everybody else stayed at Twitch, and we moved from, Good Game probably had 30 or 40 employees or contractors at the time, probably, to be honest. And when we divested out, we had 7 non-player staff initially, and I think we got to 11 before acquisition, but we were small. So yeah, no Alex.
Yeah, and I also wanted to ask about the general kind of tenor when all of this happened, because I know obviously all of the other owners that I lovingly refer to as the cartel, they really saw this as like a big win. They were all like celebrating that, like the evil was conquered, because not only were EG now essentially put in this position where they were, having to work incredibly hard just to keep the lights on, when at one time they'd been, the all-consuming powerhouse in the region, but it took Alex out of commission as well. Again, my understanding was he entered into a dispute over what his role was going to be in Twitch. They wanted to keep him employed at Twitch, but not to do the things, obviously, he had originally signed up and thought he was going to be doing. And then he immediately said, well, this is a breach of contract and a breach of our agreement, so we're gonna find ourselves in a protracted legal battle. And so ultimately, he was kind of waylaid in the sense that he couldn't just walk away from Twitch. He had to find a reason to either prove they breached their agreement or to be removed, with or without cause. But he was just tied up with all of the bullshit. And so it meant that Alex Garfield not only wasn't like potentially Evil Geniuses, he wasn't anywhere. He wasn't working for any rivals, using any of his source network or any of that stuff.
Yeah, that rings 100% true.
So let's move on to the actual period. Now we've discussed the kind of Twitch divestment. What was going on with Evil Geniuses, like when you took over, and what PPD was the CEO of the team at this time? Is that correct?
Yep. So when PPD was the player, the ownership was myself, PPD, Sumail, Clinton Loomis, who was on the Dota team as well, and Sahil Aurora, who's also on the Dota team. So it was 4 of the 5 TI winning players and myself. The 5th player, AUI 2000, would have been, had he not been kicked from the team 10 days after we won TI, in a very controversial move to bring back Arteezy, who was on the super team. Anyways, great drama. Sports are soap operas and whatnot. But so the 4 players who won TI that had stayed with the team and myself were the 5 people in ownership. And so at divestment, we agreed as a group that PPD would become CEO. I would be COO, and PPD would be responsible for the he would basically take charge of the non-DOTA focus. And again, I got move a little bit here. We lost some things. The competitive space between TI5 and TI6 post TI6, the team with a very rough season for TI6 season, which is 2016 as well. The years and the TIs match up nicely for anybody who's not a DOTA fan. So 2016 is when the divestment happens. The year is disaster for the DOTA team. We make a roster change, go through open qualifiers for TI, make it to top 3. It's kind of a miracle that year, like very surprising after the year we had. Following that TI, though, PPD is removed from the DOTA team, but we are now in the final stage of the divestment. And so the agreement that was had was the DOTA team wanted to move on and build a new roster without PPD, but didn't want to remove PPD from the equation of the ownership group because it was so close to the finish line and he had been a part of the process and had been a really passionate part of the planning and wanting to, build, again, he wanted to spin us out and make our own brand and all that stuff. He was the most involved player. So the agreement we came to was Sahil, Clinton, Sumail will stay on the team, build a couple of new players, or Clinton will go to coach actually. And PPD will become CEO, and we'll give him he will have the responsibility of managing all of the other games. I would still lead the tentpole in DOTA, and I would help with business development and with some of our operating pieces. And PPD would run he would be chiefly responsible for expanding to new games and looking for investment. That was the divestment plan. So he was other games and divestment on day one of when we divested December of 2016. He's no longer a player. He's now full-time CEO. Mostly not playing because he doesn't want to give up his ownership. If he wanted to play for a different team, he wouldn't have been an owner for the divestment. Right. So he basically had to make a tough choice, really. It was a shitty position for him to have to decide, do I want to keep playing or do I want to be a part of being a part of owning an esports team? So that was where we're at as divestment happens. PPD is sort of CEO and in control of all the other games, and I'm running DOTA.
And what's interesting about this period is it's kind of, a return to grassroots esports, right? Where it's, yourself and some of the players or retired players who are now managing the team, except you guys are now kind of behind because by this point in time, many of the other teams that were formerly grassroots had taken on major investors. Right.
Yes.
And so you went from being on top to then being handcuffed at Twitch to now hitting the reset button, except everybody else who was angry at you guys while you were at Twitch has now done things to get a lot of venture capital or outside investment. And you guys are just kind of sitting there, back at square one, as it were.
Yes. They have venture money, or at worst, they have an albatross Twitch deal at their back. It's a big buoy for them. We didn't have that. Our deal was post those deals. It was our deals as we divested. All these teams, like you said, they have money and they have a huge Twitch deal. Probably we have a market reasonable Twitch deal and no investment. So we are fucked. I think I'm in calls with people and people on Twitch. They're not going to say this to us, but I think that most people, and you said they were, the other owners were celebrating when this all happened. I think part of it is because everybody knew we were put in a huge position to fail. We had a reasonable set, we had some stuff to work with, but the deck was not stacked in our favor by any means at that divestment. We had a brand that was legacy and no longer as strong as it used to be, and we had a lot less money than other people. So, and we were run by a bunch of 23-year-olds. So. Which I guess if you're immortals was fine. So not a big.
Yeah, I mean 2016 was a crazy year in terms of the amount of money that started flowing into esports. This was a time when behind the scenes people were already talking about the Overwatch League. That was going to be Activision Blizzard's big play after their Heroes of the Storm League didn't really take off and to the degree they wanted. And so people were already going out to VC groups and the sports companies that Alex had quite presciently predicted were going to come into the space. And suddenly the raises you were seeing, they went from I remember you would get the 2014 press releases and it would be, we raised 5 million, we raised 6 million, we raised 8 million. This would be like phenomenal.
Yeah.
And then
And in
suddenly you fast
2016, I mean,
forward. Yeah.
when I was selling Renegades, like I was talking to a variety of professional sports teams about buying the slot, the LCS slot when Riot forced me to sell. There were definitely sports teams that were interested in the space, and I was talking to like major NFL teams about it.
And obviously, you know, it was like, you know, it's one of the reasons why I say like 2016 to 2018 is probably the peak of esports in general, because it was you not only had the capital going into the orgs, but it was going into tournament operators as well. You know, like, yeah, we all know now Overwatch League failed and flopped. There might have been a world that succeeded. E-League is being planned around this time as well, which was very good for Counter-Strike. And so there was just a money faucet was turned on right at the time evil geniuses were in a position not to be able to take any of it. Which is just so like unfortunate, essentially, that the people that had put evil geniuses in this position through their, I mean, and again, it was really cutthroat. I mean, the cartel basically, you know, I talked about it before. They even leveraged their relationship with Riot, and I think it was Brandon Beck came in to be like a fucking mediator between Twitch and the orgs that had like LCS teams about what should we do about evil geniuses and Alliance getting preferential treatment, because these guys are going to leave and go to YouTube, and that doesn't behoove us, Riot Games. This is how insane it got. And then obviously by the time it resolved itself, Cloud9 and Team Liquid and all these other orgs, they just walked into, would you like $20 million? Want to be in this incredible, insane, you know, league that we're planning? We can pair you up with these guys over here. They'll give you the money. Don't worry about it. And so it was just a wild time that evil geniuses basically, this is where they fall on like unbelievably hard times.
Yeah. As we came out of the divestment, you know, we knew our road was to eventually get investment. We knew we had missed the wave for LCS investment. So, you know, that as like an opportunity to find investment was gone. Which put our situation in a, like, you know, we were pretty scary, like going, you know, people were all the investment talk behind the scenes was franchise league. How can you get tied to a franchise league? You know, next up in line, in this timeline, we're LEC franchising, like potentially, which again, you know, EG, we like, you know, basing out of Europe, not really the dream for an org that's, you know, been built off of American conceptually, you know, not accurately necessarily, but conceptually American. Or like you said, Overwatch League, right? It's like those are the two things coming down the pipe. And so as we're divesting, you know, Peter's taking the first charge at finding new investment, and you know, a year and a half has passed since the DOTA TI5 win. So already we're declining off of that like high, and now DOTA is even less interesting because in TI5 when DOTA wins, this is pre-franchising, so it was like a very sexy thing. But now it's post-franchising, and it's like, well, what do you do with a DOTA? You know, it's like this, like investors don't know what to do with it. They're, you know, how to
because you don't own anything. You know, that was the sales pitch about franchising at the time, was like it was something that not only traditional sports owners but just American investors in general understood, because the spots that you know the value of the spots due to scarcity. You know, the thing about professional sports is it's not that the valuations of those businesses are reasonable in line with their revenue. It's that they're crazy expensive relative to their revenue, and so they have a lot of value because of scarcity, right? There's a limited number of slots. And so if you're a venture capitalist, you're like, ooh, look at this investment that I could make, and I'm going to get a franchise slot, and this could be worth, you know, compared to a normal business, like a higher multiple compared to revenue, which is what one of the attractive points of this was, right? It's like basically staking your claim in an evolving market with, you know, limited slots. So, and, you know, maybe a hope down the line that like many sports teams, it's going to become a billionaire's toy, and you just sell to that billionaire, and that person doesn't care about how much money they spend on this slot, and you just make bank in return.
One thing I would ask is, around this time, as you say, since you're essentially at a competitive disadvantage to some of your direct competitors within the region and even within the games, one of the obvious reasons to me as to why the team was able to succeed, I mean, obviously you just had to succeed in the game. You had to just basically be more shrewd with the pickups of the right roster. And one of the core pieces, I know because I did many interviews with him at the time, I used to talk to him at the time, was PPD. Because if people don't know, he was just a phenomenal captain. Like, he had the winner's edge. He could be an asshole when he needed to be, so almost had that coach vibe to him. Obviously, he had a great eye for talent, even sometimes like underrated gems that people. He could even let an Arteezy walk and win without him. But when he became the CEO, like, I'm sure at the time he thought, like, right, brilliant, we get a lot of that still, just not him playing in the game, it's okay. But I remember, dude, he only kept it up for like a year. I think what happened was, because he was doing some of the events as like talent, I even remember saying to him, like, mate, are you going to make it past this TI? And I think literally the TI was on that broke him. He went to TI, he saw all his fucking peers and all the people he used to beat and play with playing, and he just was like, fuck. And basically, like, people will know he left EG after that. He actually went to a bunch of others. He eventually ended up in Optic, and look, it wasn't the greatest final period, but I get that people want to like get their last, chance to compete and stuff. When that happened, did that put you in a precarious position? Did you sort of wonder what is life after PPD like?
Yes. I mean, Peter and I have a lot of respect for Peter. We've been through a lot of wars together. He'll be the first person to say, like, he's happy to be the asshole in the room. Like, it's it's an intense environment working with Peter, for better and worse at times. So that first year before he left was challenging because he was still, it was no secret that he was not interested in retiring in 2016, but he got put in a situation where it was, retire or lose his chance at ownership. So that was, we did our very best to make a balance, but like, the rest of the team going on and being successful while you're also having to promote the team that you're not on and you're a competitive person, just like a really tough position to be in for anyone who's really competitive. And yeah, that TI, I think you describe it well, did break him. We were the belle of the ball that whole year. That team was like, the young superstar. We were like One Direction or a K-pop band at at their apex, just like going around and like we could do no wrong. Everybody loved us. We were doing players were doing content. It was a love fest. And then TI hit, and we bombed out of TI. And Peter's there on the panel, and I think he relished it probably a little bit because he's competitive, and he's like, well, like, look at what they did when they didn't have me, and I don't begrudge him that. You're a competitor, like I'm a competitor. I've been there too. Like, you can't help the thoughts. And so, yeah, he decided he wanted to go and do something else. But behind the scenes, we also had a bigger situation that also, I think, led to this, which was that Peter had been taking charge in finding investment in that first year. And, we were all making sacrifices to expand the team. Every time we decided to pick up players, we all on the ownership side basically had to decide to defer salary. We were preventing, we were not taking, we had sponsorship dollars and we had some Twitch money, but it wasn't crazy. So if we wanted to invest somewhere, we had to eat it ourselves and usually we took it in deferred salary. We keep track of, what we were not taking, in the hope that at a future investment, we'd like pay ourselves back as like, basically a debt against the org. But we were all prepared with the risks and saying, okay, well, we're going to defer this. So we'd all been doing this stuff, and Peter had been working towards, at the same time, finding us investor. And actually, the Optic team is a really interesting one to bring up, because the reason why Peter goes to Optic after that TI is in large part because EG is not a part of that ownership group. What was the name of that ownership group?
Infinity, wasn't it? Was it
Infinite?
Wasn't it the Infinite? There you
Yeah.
go.
So
which is hilarious because the current EG CEO also came from Infinite.
It's a small world. Yeah.
Some say too small.
Yes. But Peter's primary talk when we were looking at investment, again, we talked a little bit about how LCS was done. It's now LEC or Overwatch in terms of looking for an investor, and you have to pair your brand to an investor to one of those things. And Peter got talking with Infinite, and that was his, he was one tracked to, we're going to join with Infinite, and they're going to get an Overwatch team. We're all going to move to, the outskirts of Dallas or whatever, and build this big esports like multi-game, and we'll have EG Dota, but there'll be a different brand in this and a different brand in that. And their view for Infinite, and again, they did this in large part, was we're going to buy Optic, we're going to buy Envy, we're going to have Overwatch, we're going to have all these different groups eventually that all fall under this shared umbrella of of esports, and we're going to have each big name team in their big name game, and we're not going to have you be a multi-game org anymore. We'll be multi-game, but different brands for everything. Peter was really sold on that idea and really liked what they were selling and the pitch that they had. When I got involved in deal flow and started looking at the deal, I really didn't like the deal. And so, we basically came into a situation where, we had to have a vote, and the vote was to not join and not do that. In large part for me, it was because I didn't want EG to become a single game brand. I didn't want EG to forever just be a Dota team in the future, because that's what it would have been. And I wanted to work with a group that believed that EG should be what it was once when I was growing up, and that it should have its place in all these big games and be a big player across, same as Cloud9 or Liquid or someone else. So we didn't do that deal, and Peter put a lot of work in that deal, and that was kind of his baby and his brainchild. And so the Dota team sucks at TI7, and the deal that he worked all year on, gets rejected by our leadership. So he leaves, and what does he do? He goes and joins them and makes them a Dota team. So that's kind of what happened there. But it did put us in a big pinch, and it's mostly because, coming out of TI7, our Dota team is struggling. Our CEO has left, and with it, one of our people who can defer salary effectively. So now instead of five of us splitting, it's four of us splitting. So the pinch becomes harder, the runway becomes shorter, and we have to reset. We don't have any, we said no because we didn't believe in the deal, but we didn't have another deal in pocket. So we had to go back to market and try and find a new deal from scratch. That's where I took over that process. But holy fuck it. Yeah, it was very stressful. It was really about just trying to keep the lights on and just trying to keep the brand afloat, trying to find some way to not lose, the EG that we'd all, loved. And for me, not wanting to do Alex wrong by having the thing end up dying.
It's crazy that you guys were in this situation, because if you look at, it wasn't, I would say, apparent from the outside, and probably a lot of people didn't know this, because you guys went from the insane, legacy of Evil Geniuses and what we all remember from the late 2000s and the early 2010s and the StarCraft era and everything like that, to the unbelievable war chest of Twitch. And for you guys to be in these like super dire straits seems very strange, given the aura around EG previously.
Yeah, and we always are a very small team. Again, we had 11 people at the time when Peter left, like non-player staff, and our like mantra was smoke and mirrors. Like, it was, how can we appear to be, we need to cast a big shadow, like
the Emperor's New Clothes.
By the way, this should literally be a Coen Brothers movie, because I can't tell if it's like a serious movie, like, the Social Network, or a comedy where it's like you have to like run around and like, hey, yes, sell PPD and that thing. Oh, what's that, Mr. Boss? Oh my goodness, what's going on? This sounds good, mate. This could be a banger movie.
The Coens are a good choice. I like the pick. They would get the amount of how stupid and awful we all were in all of this, pretty much.
So I have to ask, what was the status of some of EG's long-term sponsors? Because like, you guys had Monster Energy for forever, and like, you guys did have these ongoing deals that were kind of core to EG's identity that didn't end until the Peak 6 incompetence era. So like, you were supported somewhat by all of these deals that had been made in the past that kind of kept renewing, right?
Yep, and we had great partnerships. Like, our three core partners at that period of time were Monster, who always had our back. We're always bought in, and they always took a philosophy of, we pay by performance in the game, really. So every year at renewal, you kind of look at your teams. Who do you got? You make a spreadsheet. You kind of they ascribe a value to them, and they're willing to renew at that number. And it was always a fair number. We had AMD, who was really consistent with us and gave us a really fair, I didn't ask a lot. And then we had Comcast Xfinity, which had started as kind of a smaller deal, and that saved, like, as much people hate Xfinity, I love Xfinity because they saved our lives. We did this series with Valve, the True Sight series. A lot of people don't remember, people know True Sight because they do the TIs now, but that started as a brainchild between myself and some folks at Valve about, like, they wanted to do content around teams during the season, and we agreed to help make this program with them. They followed our TI7 team for 3 months along with another team and made actually what I think is the best docu-series, because like, our team was really successful and the other team, Fnatic in Southeast Asia and Dota at the time, falls apart in a like remarkable way. So the contrast is just like a chef's kiss. I recommend season 1, True Sight for any esports fan. It's really good.
Yeah, it does have a good reputation too. I
yeah.
recall people, being bullish on that content.
And the series changes in future seasons because nobody would sign up for it out of the tournaments. They made it a rider in the tournaments that you had to be willing to participate because the other team fell apart so hard. No one wanted themselves to be filmed in like their boot camps and then risk falling apart on camera. But we took that True Sight. We basically got Valve to pay for this AAA film production docuseries when all the LCS teams are making these really successful docuseries, right? We had no money to do ourselves or to like spec it out. Valve does it for us. It gets great reception. And then we take it to our partner Xfinity, who's doing a smaller deal with us. And Kelby, especially, a lot of credit to him at the time, Kelby May, who's now with Off-Brand
he was with Loaded. He was with
guys.
EG, then EG in Good Game, then Loaded, then Off-Brand. Yeah.
But he and I turned that into a renewal pitch with Xfinity for them to make what we called Life of a Genius, which was our version of the docu-series that were so popular in the LCS especially. And it was a huge boon for us. And that's what kept us afloat for that second year. But it was, it was scary and we were on a shoestring and our partners were there for us. But again, this is at a time when your partners didn't matter because someone's raising $20 million. They're only, EG, we might have had more revenues than I think we probably did have more revenue than some of the teams that were raising money at that point. We were pulling in several $millions a year without being in League or Counter-Strike. We were doing very well for ourselves. But these teams had just gotten $20 million, $50 million, $100 million, whatever they were getting at that time. And they no longer cared about attaching salaries to revenues. So it didn't matter if Monster was giving us a fair deal. Someone else could come in with investor money and say, well, we're going to pay triple that. And there's nothing that we can do. So it became very fraught. We got very fortunate with that deal. We got very fortunate with signing a Call of Duty team that was mostly a kind of veteran team that didn't probably have a chance of being a top 6 team, but they released a World War II map that was like putting everybody in sludge or World War II game, and our team won COD champs and like off of that kind of miraculously when we were like budgeting against a bunch of teams that were preparing for franchising. So or World of Franchising, and salaries were spiking. So those are the kind of things that kept us alive. But I was living off credit cards too. So thank you to Amex and Chase, those are my people.
By the way, wasn't there a sense essentially, like, because this is where, as you say, we already knew the Overwatch League is coming. Overwatch League basically triggered LCS, like the owners wanted that franchising. Being as just the costs of the buy-in alone, I've always thought, quite frankly, my personal theory, pure speculation, I've never really thought they actually thought slots were worth that, or even could know that they would be worth. I've always thought they made it prohibitively high buy-in, so you had to take venture capital, so it priced out certain endemic orgs. Either you partnered with someone, or the sports team came in, or the huge company came in, and the point is that way they didn't have to say to all the fans, oh, sorry, you can't let all your teams, like, they couldn't afford the price. It's a cool way to do it. Wouldn't your team be one of the ones where if there hadn't have been a sale, you would have been in a pretty bad spot, right? You could still be in Dota, you could still be in fighting games, but the bigger esports you'd be somewhat pushed out of, right?
For sure. There's no world without investment. I mean, without investment, EG looks like Alliance. Like, Alliance is a great example. Like, we took two different paths. Alliance, I don't know the machinations. I don't think they've announced any like major investment or anything, but I think they've kept a pretty like small ship. They were really they started as a Dota team, they stayed as a Dota team. They added Smash and like a couple of small places, but since then they've always kind of been like one or two teams or like a third team. They've stayed relatively small, and they've never been picking up like top tier rosters in those other spaces. And their Dota team sort of declined over time as their initial roster kind of aged out, and they couldn't get owners who were willing to take less money because they were owners to play, and so they got lower and lower rosters and became kind of a tier two Oregon team. But they've found their way to survive in that kind of like tier 2 space that's gonna be really tricky. We had a tier 1 like team of players, and we had a tier 1 mindset about EG. Like I will cop to that 100%. Like, I never wanted EG to, like, a part of keeping EG afloat to me was EG needed to be what it was when I knew it, when Alex ran it. Like, it needed to be powerful. It needed to be championship contender in the biggest games. It needed to make like splashy things. E.g. microsites were like my like drug of choice in my 20s, reading through the source code and like all the things they were hiding, and all the little like memes and things they were hiding in the HTML. Like that, I fucking died for that shit. So like it mattered to me and it mattered to us that like EG be a brand that mattered, and like our players wanted the the thing to be strong. So in a world where you're looking at everything has to shrink all the way down to being, a tier 2 org that's operating, you can't consistently run a top team even in Dota, because our Dota players would leave and we'd end up with the same situation as Alliance eventually. That's kind of the situation you're in, where you're like, you have to decide, are you going to try and go to like be a top competitor, or are you going to be, playing in a space where you go from a couple million in revenues to having to live off of, $1 million across all your games, and you're paying everybody minimums, and you're just you're relying on your on your wits to like put together something to overperform, but you're never going to compete for a championship again.
Yeah.
By the way, along these lines, a follow-up I would have is like quite literally a personal question to you, which is, look, it sounds like you were doing a very good job at the time. Like, obviously, as you say, like essentially the team had to succeed despite actually disadvantages. But quite frankly, this is the era when, because there was all the VC coming in, a lot of people are very cynical in esports, actually. Like, they might for PR reasons say they care about the brand and the org, but I actually don't think there were that many people. In fact, the joke is a lot of these people now chose that as their moment to sell. They thought they were selling at the peak and they were getting at the joke is, even though we all love him, when my boy Audi sold Dig for like $1 million, it was sort of like, yeah, well, I've got pits like, mate, if you just waited 5 years, it was like 20 million or something, so but a lot of people were sold out. So there aren't many people, Phil, who would do what you say, potentially take less salary, actually be running up debts. Essentially, in this scenario, it's like you're having to pretend to be rich, but you're having to sort of like rent the suit and rent the car and just make it appear like you're coming around the corner, like, hey, it's all good. What did that do to you personally? Because on the one hand, you're doing great work, but people would assume, I'm sure he's compensated well, he's your top executive. It's kind of a weird spot to be in, right?
Yeah, it was curious. I mean, we're, like I was traveling with the Dota team too, 250 days a year, because again, we're very lean. So I'm still running the team day to day. I'm taking our investor calls in China. I'm rooming with one of our players. So it's like 4 a.m. China time. And I'm in our practice room in the bathtub, so that if a player comes in, like in the bathroom, so that if the player comes in to use the room on the computers, I don't get like interrupted or something. So I'm like taking investor calls. It is a wild time for sure. Deeply stressful, large part where my hair went, I think, but it's like desensitized me, a life of like living and dying by your team successes, and also like stressing your finances that much, and like whether you can pay everybody tomorrow and whether or not it's all going to work out, or you're going to end up bankrupt and the other people you're in on this with are going to end up like taking a huge loss too. It is a very, very scary time. And I'm very humbled at like the willingness of people to put their faith in me. I would say in hindsight, I feel the faith was like vastly like unearned, because the risk was like too big. I was too young. Like the situation was too dire to do that. So I think it took me a lot of time to, like, even though we got through it, to feel like any kind of like okay about it. I don't know. We were young and it was a mess. And
don't you sort of need that? Like, if you essentially, it's like the Roadrunner cartoon running off the cliff. If you'd known to look down, wouldn't you kind of just fall immediately potentially?
It's a perfect. I always described it in that context, but as an image where you see someone and other people watching you see you are like sprinting at full speed, but if you realize that you're just looking at the wrong perspective and the image is actually turned and it's actually not on a flat piece of ground, but I'm basically falling down a hill and I'm just trying to keep from falling over. I'm not actually going fast. I'm just preventing death for another step. That is what the experience was for me. So the Roadrunner
That could have been a
description
good tagline: preventing death for another step. Evil Geniuses 2014 to 2018 or whatever.
Yeah. No, it was complete chaos. And again, I think resetting off the Optic deal, or off the like that Houston Infinite deal, it's one of the craziest things that we ever did. And it was 100% a thing that like you only do if you actually, the people there actually care about like the idea of the thing, because there was money. I think there were parts of the deal we just didn't like structurally as well. So don't get me wrong, there were deal parts of it, but like, the thing we passed up for the complete uncertainty of like, we're already running out of money and we probably have a year to figure this out. And now all the Overwatch teams have sold too. So now, like, what are you attaching your brand to that an investor can make sense of? it was psychotic, and people really didn't want to work with us after that on a deal because people struggled. The what was it? The Ovi's group that did the all the investor deals.
Catalyst.
The Catalyst, yeah, Catalyst was doing a lot of these.
I was part of that too, by the way.
Yeah, yes, yes, and you. Sorry, Ovi was the person I talked to the most from it. But we talked. Catalyst was this group that was helping put together endemic org with outside investment
Yes.
at the time, and
They
had
did
done
the
a lot
Madison Square Garden deal with CLG, for example. They did the Golden Guardians pitch for LCS franchising. I was not part of those because obviously my relationship with Riot was not great ever. Well, I was gonna say at that point in time, but basically ever since that point in time. But yeah, I did other stuff with Catalyst.
Yeah. So, but they're pairing these endemics, like successful endemics or brands, plus an outside investment group, right? And we come to them after all the Infinite stuff falls through, and I think they're a little bit like, why didn't you take the Infinite deal? That seemed like it would have been a good idea. And because we our inventory of groups to pair with you and what to pair you with towards, what is the thing you're investing into together from a league standpoint was very small. And so we kind of had to recalibrate a little bit and do some soul searching. We ended up not working with Catalyst as a result, just because I don't think they thought that they could find a deal for us. So we were really, out without, we had absolutely no parachute and no safety net underneath us trying to figure out how do we find something. And yeah, we had about a year to do it, finances wise. And that was stretching us to the absolute thinnest point possible.
Mm.
But
I think the worst part is as well, you can say you dodged a bullet with the Infinite deal because you absolutely did, but I mean, yeah, it's I don't know if you dodge a bullet.
For the context, guys, the Infinite was a known clown fiesta in the States.
I mean beyond
Giga Clown Fiesta. So that's what this is referring to when he says dodge the Infinite bullet. Just so you guys know, because that's not clear just from the statement.
Just in case you don't know some of their greatest hits. Obviously, they're responsible for Optic India with the cheating scandal.
Which is one of the best memes of all time, the whole fucking notepad.exe, fucking amazing. If people don't know, very brief summary, just because of how amazing this story is. That's very briefly told. First of all, the player was called Forsaken, but it's not the guy from Valorant, by the way. That's a totally different person. He was from Singapore or something. But what happened basically was they had Optic India, right? By the way, it was actually, even though it's cynical, a bit of a good idea. It was an emerging market, or loads of people. Hopefully,
which loads of people are trying to get into now.
Of course. Yeah. It's always going to be something people are going to try and tap into. And what they did is they got a Counter-Strike team, but here's the flaw. Richard did a great video about this. I can't remember which one it was. But basically, the reason it's amazing is they had this guy Forsaken. And the reason you should have known this guy might not be legit is because when you put his numbers through stats engines, he was doing simple numbers. But are you ready? He was on a dodgy laptop with bad FPS and the whole thing was so implausible. You'd have to actually believe you found the uber genius god prodigy essentially. So they didn't worry about this. They just went to the LAN, and at the LAN he's just straight hacking, and then admin notices that he's opened and he's called his hacks for real notepad.exe.
It was Word.exe.
Word.exe.
And then they're just, but the best thing is, this is my favorite part of the story, because this is something out of Curb Your Enthusiasm, guys, right? Larry David could not parody esports, right? When they came over and sort of were hey, let us look at that, he was no, get away from my piece. And obviously the jig was up on it, and then at that point the whole thing just collapsed in. And the joke, I don't think I've ever heard of Optic India for 1 second after that. What a glorious.
No, that was the worst part. They didn't just kick him. This is how right. They didn't just kick the cheater out and go, we're going to replace him with somebody else. They fired everyone else immediately and shuttered the project and said, we're not coming back to Indian esports off the face of this. Why do that? Why not? The idea initially was good. But no, anyway. So they did that. They also, behind the scenes, in a story that never got out, I was on it, but I never got round to having a strong enough thing to publish. But basically, they were signing all the Overwatch contenders teams on these unbelievably dodgy contracts that basically said, if you were good, and it was the Houston Outlaws or whatever, they had first option on you. But if you were dog shit, they didn't have to sell you to anyone or anything like that. And they were like literally Activision Blizzard were aware of this, and they were just going through the grassroots scene, and we'll just sign all the contenders teams. One org runs all of the contenders teams. That was what was going on behind the scenes. So I had a bunch of stuff on that, but it never came out. Just in general as well, the way they like handled the optic sale and all that stuff. I mean, they were clowns. I mean, you were right to dodge them. It's just if you dodge one bullet by moving to the left and then immediately get domed from another bullet, it's sort of like it's not the nicest story, unfortunately.
It turns out we're in the Matrix, but I was not Neo. There's bullets everywhere, right? So, yeah. I mean, you speak really well of the optic piece. One of the things that really turned us off of it was, their philosophy was like, hey, our idea is we're going to buy up like a bunch of these orgs. We're going to buy up all these other tertiary businesses too, and we're going to scale to have hundreds of employees immediately. We're going to be enormous. And I was, not only deeply afraid of EG being a single brand within that ecosystem, but just like I've seen our own finances. Like, I don't know where you're unlocking the money to make this make sense. So that was a big part when we went out was, I didn't want to have a like amorphous group of investors. I didn't want to be a part of a place where we were going to be one brand of 100. And I didn't want to be a part of a place, the pitch that I took out to investors was, we want to, like, our goal is to get EG back in a couple important places. We felt at the time, like, within 2 years of acquisition, our goal was like, let's get into Counter-Strike. That's where we really wanted to be. Like, in Counter-Strike, we can double down on our Valve relationships and history of the brand. It's really important. And LCS, which at the time when we were still doing investment, was still the big dog on campus. LEC had yet to take its complete spike and like surpass it and like improve. So we were like LCS and like CS, that's where we want to be. We don't want to touch these Overwatch or Call of Duty products, even though we have this big Call of Duty team that's been successful. We weren't really interested in playing the Activision Blizzard game, or I wasn't. So that was kind of what I took out to investors, and it was a pretty tricky pitch, but I also didn't want to get a conglomerate, right? So I was like only talking to groups where I could speak to the owners directly. Like, I kind of envied what Envy had. They were owned by a family office there initially. Things changed, of course, eventually with all the with everything getting kind of combined and whatnot. But I had talked to their family office after they'd already had Envy, and I was like, I like these people a lot. I like the setup. I like the idea that I can talk to like 2 or 3 people and know that like they talk directly to the money, and I can talk directly to the money, and like it can be a relationship that is more straightforward and like get alignment on, and also one where you can say we don't need to scale on like a 3 or 5 year return window. That was kind of like
and also the advantage of the family offices guys in terms of money is that there is less of an expectation oftentimes. Like, what venture capital companies do is, if they're tech venture capital companies, and during this era, it was like they expected the potential, not necessarily that you would do it, but the potential of like 100x return on their investment. And if you're dealing with a family office, and what a family office is like, it's basically just rich people, guys, like a family of rich people. They may have, I would say, not the expectation of this massive return, but a good return. But they're willing to kind of put money in that isn't this like trying to hit the home run shot. They're happy with like a double. So they're easier to work with because they'll often spend more money. And if you need more money and they believe in you, it's easier to get it than by like raising another round in VC or having to raise like a down round or other various things. And they're also, to Phil's point, easier to work with because the venture capital fund that you're getting money from is, funded by this shadowy group of limited partners, and the VC represents, their collective interests. So like you're dealing with kind of this weird intermediary VC, or oftentimes, you don't even just have one VC, you have several VCs that are kind of collaboratively investing in a given round, plus potentially individual investors as well. And if you're dealing with a family office, it's just way, way easier. Is that fair to say, Phil?
Yes, absolutely. So we were only talking to those groups. That was sort of the direction, and we really had 2 options. One of which became Peak 6, and the other of which, again, took a year to develop this stuff. But fast forwarding, we had Peak 6, which ended up being, and we had one other option, which is the option we were planning on going with. And this would have been 2018? I want to say. in this
Yeah, makes
range,
sense.
2018. If you date back your crypto calendars to look at various crypto crashes throughout time,
Oh Lord, come on.
we were talking to not being owned by crypto, but one of the founders of Consensus, which is the Ethereum blockchain development like collective that has, if you talk about like things built on blockchain, they're like the people for that, and that's kind of where all that stuff came out of. He was one of the original founders of that, and one of the like earliest people in building Ethereum and the idea of like developing on the blockchain. He was a very rich man and was very excited about working with us closely on doing this. And then, he would show up. He's a billionaire. Would show up onto the calls, meet with us. It was exactly what we wanted.
Sure.
And we're like in first version of the terms. We're talking about facilities, shared opportunities that they have with his other businesses. And the market fucking crashed in like September 2018, like somewhere in that range. Don't quote me on the exact period. And then we were fucked because I had two options and I liked one and we were working them, a little bit. And then all of a sudden we only have one option and it's peak 6. And we had positives and negatives there. There were some flags and there were some good things, and that but we really got to put in place where we're down to our last few dollars, and this is our partner, and they had some understanding of that too. Like they we're doing due diligence. They can see into our finances. They can see that we don't have money, that we have negative monies. So but
yeah, it does put you in a weaker negotiating position, obviously, because you can't hide your books in those situations. So they know how much leverage they have. I want to rewind really quick just because it is just a hilarious just sidebar on the Infinite esports and entertainment thing, because Infinite obviously scaled to an enormous size very quickly. They had all of these ambitions. They way overspent. They spent themselves into the ground. They owned Optic as the brand, as we discussed. And then they owned the LCS slot. And what ended up happening was that the Optic brand and the LCS slot were bought by Immortals later on for a deal that was allegedly valued at $100 million, which is also hilarious, given what has gone on since then. Now, I don't think $100 million in cash changed hands, obviously. A lot of this is just equity. And I think that Infinite was probably mega bailed out by Immortals, but also this goes on with the saga of Optic's ownership. It's like the hot potato of the esports scene where everybody's fucking owned Optic at some point in time. And Hector's owned it, 3 times now? 3 different times? Something like that. At least 3 different times? Is that right, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there was the
That is
original.
the way you do it. To be fair, you sell high, and then you get someone else's money to buy it back again, and then you sell again, and then you get someone else with their money to buy it. That is the way to do it. He has figured out the fucking game, boy. He's got the infinite money glitch.
I mean, Jason Lake's on it right now. He's on it. Jason Lake is just selling and rebuying complexity.
He got literal infinite money glitch, didn't he? So yeah, well done.
Not bad. Some of your best work there, Duncan. Well done.
Maybe Alex Garfield will be on that too. You wait until somebody else devalues your brand, and then you just buy it for cheap, build it up again, and then you sell it, and just continue this cycle over and over again.
I just love the idea though of the crypto angle, because the fact that that would, in some ways, that is actually the true Nightmare Fuel ownership group, because you could be doing everything right on the team side, and then you just wake up one day it's basically like Black Tuesday or whatever. Well, so you wouldn't even have done anything. It wouldn't be your fault in any way. You might have actually dodged the ball on that one, mate.
I mean, the person we were talking with, I won't say their name because of NDAs and whatnot, but I fucking loved that guy, and man, he was just good people, and whatever. Crypto, I'm not a crypto person really, but it would have been a nice time to work with somebody who seemed like a good person, and also he lost 80% of his net worth overnight. So what can you do? crazy world over there. Not for me either.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you. Why did you only have these 2 options? Because I mean, just from my experience of talking to these professional sports teams, it's a lot of professional sports teams are also run by family offices, right? They're family-owned enterprises, and there was interest. So why were you guys not, and that was your goal? Why were there any? You don't have to say names, obviously, but were there professional sports teams that were in the mix here, or why do you think you had so few suitors for such a prestigious brand?
Yeah, so there were, I think, a couple of pieces. We did talk to some other groups. There wasn't those were the only 2 people we ever talked to. Those were the 2 people who we marched down the road with in thinking that there was an actual deal to be done and finalized. We talked to some NBA teams. We talked to a couple of like VC groups and different things. So we were talking to a bunch of spaces. But again, we're talking like this is the like the third scrape of things. Like the first round of really enthusiastic people in the idea, like venture wise, an investor, any family office, they got swept up by the LCS. The second group who are like, oh, we missed out on that. We got to get in here. Give me more. Give me less for more. Jumped on to Overwatch.
Or Call of Duty later on as well.
Yeah, Call of Duty would come after our
Right.
acquisition actually, but
okay, fair enough.
But so, the third round here was LEC. We were doing this during kind of the LEC period. Like it was Overwatch and LEC kind of simultaneously, but there was still some LEC opportunity out there. And it was a different profile of orgs. We just didn't really fit with we didn't make that much sense for LEC. Like it could work, but the synergy wasn't there. Like there were more obvious groups already present. So
Right.
it wasn't something that really fit, and we didn't really like it for the brand. Again, we were really pitching, we want to get one of these LCS slots that eventually becomes available, and we want to go back into CS and be a part of kind of what eventually become the Louvre agreement and things like that. And we had a part to play in that. Condolences to everybody, but yeah, so that was that was our conversation, and so that narrowed some of our options a little bit. Just being kind of situation where we were at, there were fewer overall people in the marketplace looking for a team. We didn't have a perfect fit in some of these things, and a lot of the endemics, or a lot of the non-endemics, their idea of like prestige and like selling like your brand is like bigger than this brand or that brand, like they don't really care like what you happened 5 or 10 years ago. A lot of them don't. They care that it's like us and G2 were kind of two of the teams that were in market at the same time, is my understanding. And like G2 at the time, with Carlos, they're like, they're popping in league. They have big streamers. They're like a big new exciting brand. Like they're more exciting than our company to most investors, I think. Like on paper, our numbers are weaker. We can throw up trophies and like historical things, but we were pitching people on like, how you can buy this thing at a relatively good value compared to the rest of the marketplace, and quickly, you can give it a quick scrub and polish, and it can look like the Lakers or the Yankees, because it's got history and success that you can associate with and rebuild around. But yeah, it was just like it was a tricky space to navigate that time. There just wasn't as much of a market, and that's again where the Catalyst conversation comes from. Like Catalyst was like, we don't really know how to pair you with something. There's not really a lot of people looking, and you don't really make sense as the right fit for who is looking.
So I know we're not going to be able to talk a lot probably about Peak 6 due to NDAs. But what was the attraction of this org, and what can you say about the vetting process? Because and what are they? So first off, let's start with what are they, so people know, because they are the current owners of EG, and what were your conversations like with them? And they are in fact a family office. So
yes, though it's a curious situation where they are both a family office and also don't like to identify as a family office. It is Matt Holsizer and Jenny Just, who are the family of the family office. They're the couple who are the chief owners of this thing. But Peak 6 is the name of their family office, so to say. But they own several very successful businesses with very high EBITDA, so they create a ton of profit every year. And they need, it's like other really rich people, they make a lot of money and they need to figure out how to reinvest it. Family office is usually a way to like reinvest huge sums of money into businesses instead of just buying stocks. You're like buying whole companies sometimes. And their kind of MO is that they, each of them has their passions, and they sort of get into businesses a lot of times based on their passions. And so, family office was a profile we liked a great deal. And for me in particular, Matt Holsizer was very passionate about sports. He's a big hockey guy, really wanted to own a hockey team, owned various European football clubs, and some other things. And so he and I really like hit it off well. I think was an important piece of that like early relationship building. You know, they were very invested in my idea of what I wanted EG to be and what I felt like EG should be, which was EG should be the brand. Like we should go into spaces where EG can be the name, where we can like regrow EG and really like be another, you know, put it back on the same level as C9, as TL, as these, you know, as TSMs, as these groups that are kind of omnipresent and powerful everywhere they play. So he was very bought into that. He liked that idea. He was aggressive, and you know, they brought the idea of, again, from the family office, like you said exactly, which is that you don't have to go get around and do a fundraising round. If the family office sees something they believe in and you can sell them on it, they will go do it. And that is what, you know, that was my experience in, you know, my brief time there. You know, again, I can't speak to a lot, but you can see the public side. Like, you know, my pitch had been, I want to get us back in the LCS and back into Counter-Strike with top teams within 2 years. That was kind of like, we had a 2-year, like, it's going to take that long. They acquired us in May, and we were back in both in 6 months. And that was opportunistic. You know, you had Echo Fox fall apart. We didn't think any LCS team would be selling at that period of time. So like that was kind of a miracle situation. But they came in and they were like, fuck it, we're getting this shit. And we, you know, we went balls to the walls, and they were really great about that.
And the alleged purchase price was 30 million for that slot.
Again,
it was what was reported on.
Yeah, things I cannot speak to, but like we, you know, we worked very hard on that deal, and they were very committed to it, and they wanted it, and they believed in it. And again, this was still the period pre-COVID when LCS was still in a position of relative strength. And same thing with Counter-Strike. You know, we got wind that I knew the Louvre agreement stuff was working because I have a relationship to Victor, like that was in process, and I knew it was the time to strike for Counter-Strike. And you had this
Victor is the co-CEO of Team Liquid, guys, and the original, and he is the one who does their Dota stuff. So you guys might know Steve. Steve is in America doing their league stuff. Victor is in the Netherlands, and he does their Dota and CS stuff, their Valve stuff.
Yep.
Just for context. And Victor was a key driver to the Louvre agreement, and was working very closely with ESL to kind of be the main, I would say, one of the main team owners in driving that agreement forward.
Absolutely. And so, you know, I knew like that, you know, we had this 2-year timeline, but it's like, okay, well, Echo Fox is falling apart. Let's make a play for that. And at the same time, I can go to the family office and say, hey, this top NA team, NRG, that like comes along once in a blue moon, these guys for some reason don't want to do this anymore. They want to sell this thing. Like, we should jump on this because there's this chance to get at the ground floor of this agreement that's going to be like the closest thing to franchising you're ever going to see in, you know, in a Valve space. Like, you're going to have real asset value, which again, you know, they still care about as a family office. They still want to build investment value in the money they put in. So, you know, but they were like, that part of the relationship was exactly what I wanted for out of the gate, which was like, they shared the vision and they have the nimbleness to move if and when you see opportunity ahead of a timeline, which we did there. You know, we saw opportunity to be in those spaces much earlier than we'd been planning. So that was kind of the good part of the profile, and the part of the profile that played out well. You know, Nicole, you know, she didn't come out of nowhere. She was working for Peak Six at the time. She was the person vetting deals. She was vetting, you know, us versus G2 versus other things that they were looking at. They were looking at esports and a few different teams. And we, you know, and so I built a relationship to Nicole, and I think we had a really good rapport in kind of the deal flow process and the vetting process, and, you know, just worked well together during that period. So, you know, again, we came to the point of doing the deal, knowing that we were probably not getting the best deal in the world. We were getting a fair deal, and we got, you know, good opportunity for some of our people to, you know, to be very successful out of it. And we gave, you know, we got ourselves, like, everybody got paid. We got back to, like, you know, we got back to solvency, and we got back in with owners who were willing to spend and wanted to grow. So that was kind of the,
I think crucially too, it's important to note here that, you know, you don't have to talk about this, Phil, but like, part of your deferred salary is like, you know, the reason why you're working so hard and living off your fucking credit cards and deferring your salary is so that you can eventually get paid, right? And it's crucial to note that if you guys don't sell this team and you are running on fumes, that your entire life for the last few years is just pointless financially, right? And that's, you know, and also, Phil, you know, it's also true that you had an obligation to your other co-owners who were in the same situation. So even if some people may have disagreed with the decision to sell, there is, an ethical obligation that you guys have to each other to not like collectively ruin your fucking lives, right? And so it may have been a hard call, and you may not have had the most suitors, but given the dire state of the company and the fact that, you have a duty, both to yourself and others, to like see yourself through this financially, like, it can feel like you need to go through it. And indeed, there's a very strong argument to do what you did. So I just don't want people to like start jumping all over you because of what ends up happening. And you could not have known, most likely, I don't think it was reasonable to assume what ended up happening under Peak 6 was like,
Oh, of course
what was going to happen.
Oh, that was
Like,
an
it's
anomaly.
absurd.
Come on. And also, I'll even say, I'll actually even give him extra props for the thing when he was running up all the credit cards and having to pretend he was it. He wasn't just doing that, guys, because he wanted a job in esports and he thought, it'd be cool if he. Also, remember what he said earlier? He's having to convince players take less salary and take some equity. When that scenario, you can't then go, lol, there was no equity in the end. We never sold it. It's broke. Like you'd feel extra. It'd be more of a weight on your shoulders, I've no doubt. So at that point, you're trying to sort of prop up other people too.
Yeah, I can tell you clearly, everybody was ready to sell when the sale happened. We were at a point where, if the sale didn't happen, we were looking at dissolving at that point, or very nearly after. If it had fallen through, there was no timeline to get. We'd done a bridge round to like give us a little bit of finance before, so we'd taken a little bit of money from some people we were able to put together. But that was like $20,000-$30,000 or like $100,000 maybe total, just like a small sum to try and
right.
like.
And you also have an obligation to your investors in that bridge round not to immediately lose all their money.
Yeah, and they bridged us knowing that we had a deal that was in the works that just needed more time. So, and again, like there were yellow flags. We knew that there was some, that they could be aggressive. They could be aggressive as a group for good, and also sometimes potentially for putting you in more challenging positions in businesses they had run. And so but we had felt good about the people we worked with on the deal. I'd spoken directly to Matt and Jenny frequently. They were also really invested. Like we had regular meetings following, and it really went the way I'd hoped it would go for a while. I eventually left to go work on other things, and things changed afterwards. I think by most people's perspective, but I don't know. It's heartbreaking to see what has happened to it, feeling so good. There in a 10-day period, we got an LCS slot and we got the NRG CS team. I can't tell you how high of a high that was. Like talking to Alex and being like, "We fucking did it, man. We got this thing. Like somehow, some way, we got this like thing that was had daggers like at every angle, and we got it through, and we're fucking back, man. Like EG's back. Nobody even knew we were getting that CS team. We like came out of nowhere with it. We fucking win ESL New York. Like it was like the highest point of my whole life that week. And it almost all makes it feel worth it. But also I saw what happened to Alex with Twitch and selling to a company and feeling like having your whole livelihood taken from you when like you're meant, like everything that you identify as yourself, you lose that when someone else owns the thing and they move away from what you want for it. And I made the decision when we sold that I wasn't going to let myself be put in that place where I know that I don't own this anymore. I can do everything I can within my powers, but it's not mine. And I have to accept that at some level there is an end to like where I can influence it. And I have to make my best mental health decision to not have what happened to Alex, where he ended up years on in legal battles and and dealing with that stuff. So
and Alex is in the same place that Hector's been in too, which is like watching the Optic brand be used and abused by other people, and like taking big issue with that as something he built. And I think also, you said at the start of this, you came from a fan perspective, and so there is from those of us who are on the outside who were watching EG, there is a glorified, lionized version of evil geniuses in our mind. And I imagine for you it was probably something of a dream to be part of EG and to be given the keys to the kingdom. And so to help it survive and then go from fucking almost broke to $30 million LCS acquisition, as you say, in the kind of peak of LCS fervor, when the viewership was extremely good, everybody was very bullish. These slots were trading for a lot of money. Nobody wanted to give them up. The only reason Echo Fox had to give them up is because Riot forced them to because of their like ownership racism scandal. And like the fact that one of the equity holders in the company like wouldn't divest, and so they forced the sale of the slot. And so you were a beneficiary of that, and also NRG, who when we talk about Counter-Strike, and Richard and Thorin can chime in here, at that point in time, NRG's team was a very like the North American team,
They were
and it
very
was
eligible, yes.
Yeah, they were really good, and they were like the kings of NA. And like you said, Phil, you wanted this to be an NA brand primarily, and having a very good NA Counter-Strike team has been a relative rarity in the history of the game, compared to the European dominance of CS over the years. And NRG kind of suddenly decided that, well, it's not really worth it having this team, and you guys were just there to scoop it up, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, I mean, it was a great feeling, and yeah, it didn't last. And for the brand, of course, it hasn't lasted. But I feel I've made peace with the reality of where things have gone, and I I hope that a better future exists for the brand somewhere, some way. But yeah. It's a lot of complicated feelings. But
the key question, like I've never understood, is why didn't they just make you the CEO and Nicole the COO instead of the other way around? And then I think if because okay, hey, we're buying an esports org, and this is the guy who has been instrumental in keeping the lights on all this time. Meanwhile, we have Ivy League, educated, successful.
I mean, but she's like in her what, mid-20s at this point in time,
yeah,
right?
Why not say, okay, we're going to give her a C-suite role, but like she can't be the one calling the shots in totality because she doesn't know the space. Meanwhile, this guy has demonstrated he does, and has also been instrumental in getting this deal across the line. So he needs to have the veto on all the major decisions, surely. So that for me has always been the thing I've never understood, and I honestly believe, because Nicole, like I'll just say it, like Nicole is a really unlikable person, and everyone I've interviewed pretty much confirms this. I've heard so many stories, so many anecdotes that never made it into the public domain. And how like she demoralized the troops pretty much on day one. I just can't believe that if it had been the other way around and there was just somebody above her in the C-suite structure, I think Evil Geniuses would have been fine.
Yeah, I have some feelings about the what ifs of all of that. Nicole and I worked very well in for a long period of time, and we had some great successes in those early days and in getting the deal together. The reality was, again, I kind of framed the situation when we were selling, right? We had some limited leverage, number one, right? And I was aware of that at the outset, even before we approached Peak Six or this other group or anyone else. When Peter left, I had the opportunity to move from COO to CEO, and I actively chose to stay in the COO role because I put it on every one of our decks that we would work collaboratively with the group that we did the investment with to pick a CEO. Now, there was always in that conversation, there's always a possibility, well, I could step into that role. But also we know that especially for outside investor groups, they like to pick their person. It's a big selling point for them. And for some teams that come in with a young, hot esports CEO in that role, who's not willing to compromise, they're like, I'm the CEO. It's a turnoff. It's a detractor for some of these groups who want to.
Yeah, you also question loyalty to the new ownership potentially, or motives.
For sure. And yeah, that's played out in some cases, right? Where some of like places where investor groups worked with an esports team and the CEO was an esports person, sometimes the esports person CEO endemic ended up going pretty rogue and being in. So it kind of cuts both ways. You can see where their trepidation is. I chose to keep the COO side and leave it as an open question and an open opportunity because I wanted to juice our pitch as best we can. And for Peak Six, they really liked the idea of being able to fill that spot and wanted to put Nicole into that spot. And I'd been working with her on the deal closely and felt like I could work with her. And so we talked about that all itself before close, of course, and had worked it out. But it was something I had gone in before even Peak Six, ready to deal with the reality of that as a possibility and having to navigate that. So. But I do have a lot of like mental what ifs because I don't disagree. Like, if things had been flipped, maybe some things work out differently. Who knows? But it's hard to say. I was involved in a lot of leadership stuff, especially in that first year. So it's, things change, but I felt pretty good about how things went while I was there, even though she was CEO and I was COO. I felt like at that time we were still on the same page.
The pre Jessica Hammond, basically, or would you disagree with that characterization?
Again, I would speak just to the broad generalities of some of these pre Peak Six experiences and generally the feeling good about especially the public successes we had in our first year working together.
Look,
I have some limitations, so I'm trying not to
no. Listen,
go beyond.
We knew that. We knew that coming in.
Is it the case? Look, I understand from some of these war stories, some of the horror stories, like you've been through the ringer by being in this team. But I would say, actually, assuming this all checks out and someone went and they looked into the background and asked around and references and stuff, if anything, actually, this sounds like the best advert I've ever seen for someone to be CEO of an esports organization. Like, you've essentially run it at like a min-max, which almost every other org did not do when they thought they could turn on the money tap from the VC and buy as many teams as they could and overpay for players. Sounds like you actually did kind of like walk the line very, very well. There's very few people like that in esports, I'd say.
I would not say I walked the line very well. And if you're calling me for a esports CEO job, I decline. I do not want to run a team ever again. It's not on my list. So this is not
me too, buddy. Yeah. Like I don't like the stress of that time period because I was running a team during that time period with no investment also is fucking astronomical. So it's not fun.
Yeah, I was playing basketball the other day. I play a lot of basketball, and someone was like, "Phil, you're always just so calm out there." And I'm like, "It's because you don't know the things I have seen and the things I have been through. Like everything else is just deadened to me after that experience." But I feel at peace with the time and feel good about some of the things. But I made a billion mistakes and there's still things that I feel like deeply regrettable about because, it wasn't clean. Everybody didn't get out clean. There are some dead bodies along the way, 100%. People who who didn't get the best deal or didn't get the best opportunity. And like, it fucking sucks. I'm happy we got anybody out with anything and that we gave the thing some life and we gave ourselves a shot like at doing some cool things. After all of that, like that stuff I'm really happy and proud about. And I'm just glad to be alive about the rest of it. So.
Just to close the loop on this. So when you left EG post acquisition, I'm not going to ask why.
Yeah.
But what were your goals in kind of making a career change at that point in time?
Yeah. We parted amicably. And for me, I would say I was interested in doing some different things. I would say one of my core pieces when I came into this space, again, I came in player management, working with the DOTA team. Like we said, you traveled with the team, right? If the team left, I loved EG, but if the team left the org, I would have left with them. Like we were a unit, and working for those players and those people was what I really cared about. And, the whole road from negotiating a divestment for 16 months to spending 2 years rebuilding an org at grassroots and trying to get investment. All of that was with and in service of these players I had worked with for a really long time. And I think one of the things that invariably changed post acquisition is that I was now clearly no longer working for and with players. There's a different set of leaders and a different set of rules. I think the first thing that really soured my feelings, not necessarily about EG, but just about kind of the place I was in the industry, was when the CSPPA and the team and the Counter-Strike teams, we'd moved into Counter-Strike, and there's these conversations about CSPPA and Counter-Strike and all these leagues. Now, CSPPA, many flaws. I don't even know if they still exist, really, to be honest, but we haven't had contact with them in a long time on our PA side. But the conversations, I'm on a team owner side, and suddenly I'm in team owner chats where people are talking about union busting tactics and how to prevent your players from signing, and we'll cut any player who joins up and all these things. There were some really aggressive mindsets, and I was like, this just ain't me. It's just not who I am. I can't really I get that that's kind of what's being asked of this role in this space, and it's just not really who I was. So I think I just started to feel very distant from the economics of the world, especially as people started to reach the end of their VC timelines and started to feel more stressed to turn things around. It really meant turning the screws on players and taking more, being more callous and aggressive. Just wasn't something that I had the mental energy for anymore after the years of hair loss already. So
I mean, I think it's true that probably everybody here and many other people who have worked in esports for a long time can sympathize with your position, which is we all got into esports when it was grassroots passion, and we had a love for the scene and love for the players. And when it turns into a very cutthroat business, it's not why any of us were here in the first place.
Yeah, and I did a lot of hard deals, and was no stranger to making really hard player roster changes throughout the years, and anything like that.
That's different than union busting.
It just the tenor of the industry changed in a way, and I was in a position now working in a different way with different people. The dynamics just didn't fit with what I was really aligned on, and I just knew I wanted to work on something different. I didn't really know what it was, but EG was kind enough to have an amicable end to our relationship, and proud of the work we did before my departure, which was, I guess, officially at the end of 2019. Sort of unofficially, I really stopped working full time while we were working out departure earlier in the year. But yeah, so I felt it was a good time. I wanted to do something else, and I didn't really know what it was, but eventually this PA opportunity came about, and that was something that was just really interesting, exciting for me, and was a chance to do something that had a lot less stress and a lot more positive good upside. So that was a nice change of pace.
Well, you thought so, but I can tell you from having personally worked with Doublelift that working with Doublelift actually is a giant cause of stress.
Peter's a great guy. Appreciate all of his help and support.
Yeah, just all it takes is one stream.
He's even going to watch this. You have to understand, guys, and go, see, I told you. He thought it was brilliant. What do you expect, guys? That's what I love about him, by the way. Love it.
I mean, just on the point of what happened with Evil Geniuses, I think it's kind of analogous to what happened in a lot of the video games developers companies down the years, probably ones we all grew up with and enjoyed, where it was basically you had a bunch of fucking hippie coders that just wanted to make good shit. And to get that good shit done, they had to enter into partnerships with corporate entities. And initially it's great because the overtures the corporates make to the creatives is, don't worry, just do your thing. We just want a great game. That's all we really care about. Don't worry about it. And then it becomes deadlines or sequels, or how do we move more units, and how do we keep you accountable for your work and your productivity. And suddenly we have to start measuring this. And by the way, to measure it, we're going to have to actually recruit and bring in some other corporates. And suddenly, you see the creatives are getting more and more squeezed to do unhealthy things. They get crunched. and eventually they leave, and often they quit the industry. And that's been going on at like games companies for like decades. I mean, we can, it's just replete with examples of that. And now it's becoming a very real phenomenon in esports. I think a lot of esports creative types, even people that don't sound like they're creatives, like yourself, you're a COO, you might not associate that with being like an inherent creative person, but there you are, and you're talking about, we made documentaries and we did all this, and I came up with all these ideas for content. I think people who work in esports, we kind of we bridge many different areas, and I think a lot of us are inherently creative, and we just want to see cool shit, and we are a little bit hippy dippy, and this is why often I just don't think we play nice when the corporates come around, because they don't really understand us, and they don't understand where we came from when it was like literally strapping a fucking CRT monitor to your back, walking all the way to like fucking Mount Doom just to play a video game or admin a tournament or whatever it might be. That's the grassroots of esports right there. And they, to quote my good friend Gowles, they will never understand that. They will simply never understand. So I have a lot of sympathy for what happens with
it's also that the fight for endemic control is one based off of wisdom within the industry and creative intuition. And it's like, if you don't understand the right moves to make that may not have like cold business logic to them, but the reaction to the fan base is going to be very positive and grow the brand. And like, it may seem weird, some of the moves that you take to get fan activation and more brand loyalty. But these people just reject these ideas, and we will go into this in a future episode. But that is kind of a preview of what happens with Evil Geniuses. Phil, is like, once you leave and like the rebrand comes through, and Nicole makes herself like the center of attention at EG, it feels deeply weird to the core EG fan base. And the OG people who enjoyed Evil Geniuses from back in the day, and also just doesn't make any sense in the context of like engendering future fans in esports either, right? Because that's not really what EG was about. EG,
no, it was always players first.
As far as
for
famous
good or
as Alex
ill, they always
Garfield
put the players up front and center.
As far as as famous as Alex Garfield is, like, he was always secondary to Idra and In Control and Huck and the storylines of these players on the roster. Arteezy, of course, so it is kind of a whiplash, especially with people like PPD and you leading the org, directly into the new Peak 6 ownership and what ends up actually happening to the brand, which doesn't make people like them, and it loses them OG fans too. And I think it's like one of those things where the best move for EG, and I've said this many times, would have been to draw back into their OG fan base as an attempt to rekindle those fans. Have, unfortunately, In Control died, but have In Control, or, as a person, as like the figurehead of the org, or one of their other like legacy players, and then use that image to kind of like draw back in the people who had very fond memories of EG, and speak authentically to the audience, and then try and develop the new wave of fans from there with the new games. So, yeah, it does. It ends up being a missed opportunity, to the point that we basically have, back to Skeleton Crew life support EG today looking for buyers, and like directly taking buyouts from Riot for the LCS slot, and a massive loss. Anybody have any final thoughts here as we wrap up this episode? Because we're not gonna like dive too deeply into the Peak 6 this time, because that's where a lot of the reporting is going to come in. And
we're gonna spare Phil the awkwardness of that. Like, because every answer would just be, I have an NDA.
I have no opinion.
Well, listen, obviously as well, it is worth pointing out. I mean, they were just thoroughly unpleasant, and lots of threats of litigation. Obviously, the Sumail lawsuit was Sumail's thing, but there was other supposed threats of litigation and ongoing litigation that was like always out there, and you know, they're just not a nice group of people. So I'm hugely sympathetic. The good news is apparently they did do an assessment on whether or not they could sue me, and I believe Duncan as well. And they decided that no, they sort of couldn't. That we would be protected because we were doing journalism. So we will be able to.
Can we get that on
continue
record? Can we have some sort of like printout of that with like authorized, notarized seal that we were in fact doing journalism?
Are you anyone in esports? If you haven't been in a lawsuit, Duncan, don't you want to be in one?
True.
Yeah.
Well, my fear is more like that. Listen, at least on this one, I did something. My fear is that because people do think we're the same person, I will just be like forced into a lawsuit with you. Even if I didn't do anything, it's like I'll just get called up even if I'm out of esports. Like, right, you have to appeal this.
Mate, it'll be the ultimate heel turn. You'll fucking testify against me.
There you go, exactly. You'll be like,
on behalf of ESL.
We better get our heads together, Duncan. What are we going to do? They've got to say that. Well, here's the thing, Rich. I've turned state's evidence, haven't I? I sold you up the river, mate.
Listen, the deal was just too good.
Exactly.
The deal was just too good, Rich. So I'm sorry. But yeah,
listen, mate, I'm walking around holding someone's pocket from fucking esports, mate. At least
that's fair.
For crypto or something, millions of dollars or something. What the fuck's going on? Why don't I get to win?
But yeah, I mean, look, I guess my final thing I just want to say is obviously I think, you know, as I said earlier, I think Phil did a lot of, you know, really good work at a time when, and there were other people behind the scenes, you know, perhaps some people we didn't talk about. I think after the divestment from Twitch, basically the people who were left at Evil Geniuses were like, you know, they were true blue. Like they really wanted the org to succeed. And it just so happened to be at a time when it was the hardest time to be essentially bootstrapping an organization if you didn't have access to the money faucet that all of your rivals did. And so, you know, for me, the key flaw in what leads to ultimately the demise of Evil Geniuses is that peak six. Like a lot of people, when they buy these esports properties, they don't invest in the people that know the space and know what's good and know what's going to go over with the fans. They want to come in and be the disruptors, you know, unironically. You know, that was obviously plastered all over the Evil Geniuses website. And it's just so fucking pathetic that that mistake has been made time and time again. The good news is, I think after the failure of like Evil Geniuses and where it's at now and all the other orgs that we've talked about, like the Infinites and the Optics and all this other stuff, and not to mention the developer-run leagues, I think all of that goes away and sort of never comes back, or certainly, you know, not for a long, long time. I think people can all see these are bad ideas, and that if you want to succeed in esports, you back the experts, you back your people. And so obviously it's great to have Phil on and get all of his insight into that, because as I said, I think if they'd given him the big chair, that comedic throne that Nicole had pictures of herself taken in repeatedly while she was playing with trophies that she never won, I think if they just put him in that chair, I think EG is still here probably.
Final thoughts on this saga, Phil?
Thanks for having me on. Again, I love EG, and I appreciate you all doing the work of, like, you know, I know there's a reckoning piece of this in the recent history, but I think helping people who don't understand or maybe forgot, you know, what EG has been and kind of what it's been for fans and for esports over the years means a lot. So I appreciate all the work and investigating you all do. So.
Well, you know, people don't understand the rage, Phil, about what has happened without understanding the context of what came before and why everybody, ourselves included, who's part of the OG esports scene, had such a strong affinity for Evil Geniuses. And also the number of people who are legacy esports, you know, people in the space. I mean, you were name checking a bunch of people who have run this org, like we talked about. Alex Garfield, Kelby May, PPD, yourself, Charlie Yang. I mean, these are all people who have long careers in esports, and then also not even to mention the players. Huck went on into management in esports later on after being a professional player. In Control was obviously a major personality for a long time, and so like many of the people within esports have professionally been involved with Evil Geniuses at some point in time, and so that makes it hard for people who still work in this space to see what has become of it in the end. And so for fans who came later who didn't exist in these eras and didn't understand, or maybe they weren't Dota fans, right? When EG was on top of the Dota world and like that was your main division. This is, I think it's important history, and I think people have really enjoyed the first episode, and I hope they should enjoy all the insight in this one as well. But it's also just, frankly, I think important to document this esports history because nobody's ever done like a survey, as far as I know, on a team like this before. So it's great to have you as an insider on this show to discuss all of that. Especially somebody who was basically, you were de facto CEO, if we're being honest, for a lot of this time period.
Yeah, our small contribution to the oral history of esports that will someday exist.
And maybe people could learn from the mistakes. Wouldn't that be nice?
Well, let's not set our sights too high.
Last words, Thorin, on this episode?
I mean, I would just say this is also probably a good series in the sense that if people are newer to esports, they're only going to know some of these stories that have come along. And in fact, they're probably going to imagine we have some incredible animosity just to the EG brand or something bizarre like that. Whereas actually, I would agree with Monty. I think it's the opposite. I think actually, like one of the things I went to great pains in the very beginning episode to point out was a lot of people only track this even back to Alex Garfield's time. Whereas actually, if you don't know, along with SK Gaming in Europe, this is like the original esports brand. I mean, there wasn't even esports back then. It was just Quake, if you don't know, guys. Like in North America, this is the first team that goes on and gets through all the eras and actually survived the whole way, which is very important. Like SK, they never had the time they went away and someone brought back Ninjas in Pajamas or brought back... No one necroed this and never did that thing that happened in clans back in the day where someone just takes the name because it's cool and does it. No. There's a through line that goes the whole way. So even if it's become in recent times something that you might not recognize or you might not like, etc., I do think actually, like Phil said earlier, you want to have like history in orgs like that. You don't want it to just be that every year, essentially. It's like, let's just get like a 5-stack for TI. Oh, you want to sponsor us? Brilliant. Warren, well, here's my results from that year. Next year, do I have a good enough team? That would be a nightmare. No one would want that as esports. You actually want it to be where you have a Yankees and you have a Chicago Bears and you have these historic franchises, whether they're in their best time period now or not. Not least because I also hope one day that what esports will do is serve a function like sports in society, where there will be the guy who grew up, he was 22 when Alex Garfield was running StarCraft and had nothing in the CS team, and then his kid later, they get the canny team in CS3 or whatever, and he's watching the games with him, and there's actually like a heritage. We support evil geniuses in our team. That would be cool. I think that would be awesome in the same way as people inherit sometimes cursed lineages, like supporting the Red Sox or something, whatever it might be. But that adds a charm, doesn't it? It's not just the game at that point. You have this culture.
You suffer together.
That's around. Yeah, whereas the problem is, I've always said this, the newer brands that come in, you can be cool and you can be number one now, but you can never fake that history. That history, you had to be there and you had to go through some of the ups and downs filled in, some of the things these orgs, the different games to get to this point. And I do think there's value there. I actually think, I mean, obviously, I'm somewhat biased. I think esports history has value, believe it or not, my entire branch of the tree I'm sitting on. And also, I think Phil did a very good job here. I think if people saw the somewhat contentious previous episode, it was actually on one before that by guys ages ago, which was about, I can't remember, what was the first one you were on? What was the first episode?
The player walkout with the
one before that.
Group rights, I think, talking
group
about
rights. There you go. We had one ages before that Monty forgot. Right. Basically, obviously, if people saw that one, they might also imagine like we're just in complete loggerheads, etc. But I think people will have a much better sense of who you are at this point in time. Maybe they didn't know your background. As you say, you weren't exactly like the face of the brand the whole time. You let the players be the face of the brand.
Weird. Crazy idea. Crazy idea. All right, guys. So Richard, Thorin, you guys want to do a couple viewer questions to close out this episode?
Yeah, I'm happy. I've just realized that like I'm like sat in the dark.
Yeah.
So the sun has gone down.
If they're not unduly
I didn't even turn any lights on. I was like, oh, okay.
Unduly specific to like us. Also, Phil can answer if it's like a movie question or something related like that. He can jump in as well.
Yeah, do you mind sticking around for just a couple of minutes, Phil?
I'm here as long as there's movie questions.
Yeah.
All right, I'll pick some movie questions.
If people who don't know, another way you can support us, as well as doing things like buying those delicious never frozen factor meals with gourmet plus menus, etc., and using that code 50% off, you can also subscribe to our Discord, the Last Free Nation Discord. If you do so, there is a channel where you could submit questions. Monty will source them, and he asks them typically on Summoning Insight, but sometimes we do the one here if we have Richard.
Yep. And we do have a channel for Four Horsemen questions as well. We just normally are in a rush on this. Here's an interesting one. We got a library of these questions. I'll hand select some. This one I think is interesting. You could tell it's dated now. Beyond the Summit, but it's actually related to one of the people we talked about in the show. So Beyond the Summit has recently announced they're closing their doors. Do you think more small TOs are going to follow suit given the coming recession? I mean, you would argue whether there's one or not. What effect will this have on up-and-coming teams /TOs? So Beyond the Summit was kind of a boutique tournament organizer that was run by LD, who is a former DOTA caster. And actually, it turns out that, yes, they closed their doors, but the end of this story is that they were bought by Offbrand, which is Ludwig's company, which is where Kelby May, who used to work at EG/Good Game Agency, now works. Also, Nick Allen, you guys may remember him from Riot, later Loaded. Now, and Kelby was also at Loaded, works there as well. So it actually has been picked up by an influencer, and they in fact continue to run like Smash events and stuff like that. So you guys have any takes on kind of like small TOs? Because I think really this is about like, have small TOs changed into influencer org, like Disguised is running with his like tier 2 team right now, and is this kind of the future of maybe more grassroots esports?
I mean, my thoughts on that are pretty much like we just get right back to the fucking fans. Like, you can have that now. You just have to be willing to pay for it. Like, just the price of a Twitch sub would make like a huge difference. Means you could essentially run a tournament, pared down. Wouldn't have to be anything spectacular. You wouldn't have to necessarily, you could do it online and run an entertaining tournament with just a small studio for like your commentators in or the people you wanted to make content with remotely. And BTS were essentially, they came out of a Kickstarter to get going. And then they were really smart in how they ran tournaments. I mean, they had really good people who understood the esports economy, and they had very good sponsors and very good partners.
Yeah, they hired a bunch of like really OG esports people like Hotbid.
Hotbid, exactly. Yeah.
Who really like, I think, are in touch with kind of the spirit of esports, and that's why people loved the Beyond the Summit events. And they were, they didn't overspend. They were in the Los Angeles area, but they were like not really in LA.
It was a decent drive away, put that way.
Yeah, they were pretty far the fuck away. And
not SPCs either. My players had many comments always.
Oh yeah, that's also true. CS players complained like, "Fuck, don't worry."
They had a decent studio space, but they were like grassroots esports, and what were those? The Take TV events were like the European equivalent of this,
which obviously you do that in Krefeld, which is a fucking
same concept.
Small town, putting it nicely. But I mean, look, just imagine, like, again, imagine a world where you could commit to running a tournament if you could just get like a pre-pledge or something like from the fans. Like, yeah, obviously we're going to pay $5 to watch this tournament, and it's going to give you a revenue stream right out of the box. I just don't understand. Like, I would absolutely 100%, if it meant like Beyond the Summit came back, I would 100% pay for that. Of course I would. And I just don't know why more fans don't feel that way. Every time I broach the subject of pay-per-view, fans literally say that, like, I mean, obviously, there's like essentially two types of fan. There's like our audience, which are getting older and they've got disposable income and whatnot, and they genuinely care and they're invested. And they always say, yeah, of course I would pay. But then there's the majority of esports fans, which are this Zoomer eyeball harvesting operation we're all trying to do. They just say, if I had to pay for it, I'll just watch something else. And you go, oh. And the thing that I really hate about where esports has got to economically is we're so afraid of big number go down that we never take an audit of how many real paying fans we actually have. And if we did that, guess what? Maybe we could plan for events, and maybe people could project into the future, but instead it's just smoke and mirrors bullshit still. So I don't even like put it this way. The pandemic proved like we might be an actual recession-proof industry in the sense that we could pivot to like online and we could pare down our operations. We could still put a product out. It didn't kill any of the big leagues or even the medium-sized tournament operators. In fact, people started emulating the methods we were doing in mainstream entertainment so they could get a product out. All we had to do was flick a switch essentially and go from in LAN to online, in person to online essentially. So I mean, we're never, unless we get like a 2008 complete hard reset, I don't think we're in a bad space. I think we still continue to grow. But the fans at some point are going to have to bring more to the table than making that number in the fucking corner go up by one. That can't be your sole contribution as a consumer.
Yeah, and by the way,
we're past that.
I mean, the reason why we have increasing numbers of sponsors on Blast Free Nation is because you guys support our sponsors.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And this has been it's been kind of a long road to hoe to get to the point we're at now. But like we're doing. On many of our shows, we're starting to get multiple sponsor reads per episode, brand deals, everything like that are coming through. And the network's doing very well, and we have great viewership for a podcast network. And like I said, we did 10 million podcast downloads last year, which is huge across 10, 12 shows. We're expanding now outside of esports into traditional sports, movies, film. Like obviously, Thorin, Richard, and I do foreplay on films.
Phrasing.
Yeah, that'll definitely be taken out of context. Well, Richard, we named the show that it was inevitable that things would be said.
I'll take it where I can.
But I would say that esports winter is not quite so grim for many of the people in this particular conversation. Compared to what you might hear from other content creators out there who have not cultivated an audience that's willing to support them. And I think that's why, and Phil can talk to this too, a lot of the content creators that we have out there, the new hotness is in the influencers and like the streamers, because their audiences actually financially support them. Whereas like that really hasn't been true of the esports teams, generally speaking.
Yeah.
I think what I would say on the topic of Beyond the Summit, to go back to that, is this. The reason why, even though I actually do think it had like a cool aesthetic and sometimes it produced some good clips, the reason I'm not super sad that it went away is it's a bit like if you want to talk about like teams, and we had that discussion earlier of when you get the Overwatch League comes in and LEC comes in and you've got to be part of the Louvre. And if you're not in the haves, you're going to be the have-nots and you very quickly will be irrelevant. Like that's their problem. They wanted to play the game of being a tournament organizer where you take money from other people and you're trying to build up a brand that's going to be worth something one day. Here's the problem with that. If you do that, the problem with esports is people will always crank it up and play chicken with you, and you have to go to the nth degree and you have to leverage completely and you have to take in loads of money and then you have to do massive numbers, and it becomes you essentially have to compete with an ESL. You have to compete on some level, at some level of scale. So to me, the real problem they had there was, I would expect something like this project, like Richard says, to be grassroots up. It needs to be an actual functional business at a minimum, just based on patronage from fans. Like, if people don't know, Home Story Cup did actually have times, I believe, where they crowdsourced for some of the prize money. They would even do things towards the end where, because in StarCraft, essentially, it was so iconic that it was the community cup type thing, and all the casters would like volunteer their time and all that jazz. I don't think they charged day rates. That it even became a famous thing towards the end that sometimes the prize money would just get doubled on the first day because some like clever guy, I remember the CEO of Shopify did this one year. Well, look, he just realized listen, it's only 25k, but I'm going to get all this insane goodwill that I've just doubled the prize purse for all the players right before the event. That's another way you could do it. You could do that approach. So I think their problem was they were trying to be a minnow in a giant pond where the sharks just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually there's nothing left for you to eat in this analogy. And then also, I will just say, I don't know what it was like in Smash and other games. I don't follow fighting games. I actually do think that what made Home Story Cup so iconic in StarCraft is that it was so different. And crucially, all the casters and the players, like people like Rotterdam, used to actually just like fucking love attending to just cast all day long for like a week or something mental, or 4 days or something, and just give up their time. I don't know in some of these other games. Like I can tell you, we got paid day rates when we came to do CS Summit, and it was very much more just like you thought of it like on the calendar. Should I do this Star Ladder? Should I do the CS Summit? And then I also think the problem they had in Counter-Strike was, I can just tell you from my own perspective, everyone used to, in the era when I went first, everyone used to message when they would say a talent house, like, get Thorin on this, it'd be like the perfect thing for him. Think about like all the banter, all the interactions with players. And I thought, yeah, same thing, right? It'd be great. So Hotbid and then brought me in. We did a few skits. People might remember I did that famous food review where I do all the American food review. But the problem was, essentially, in Counter-Strike at least, they aren't like StarCraft where the pros had to be a bit more chill because they're on their own. Because they're all in teams and naturally they have cliques, you know, people with big egos. And by the way, already people are getting paid like $13,000 a month, and then they go into this tiny house to play and they go, what the hell are the PCs on top of the year? It's like, yeah, it's in a fucking house, mate. You are aware this is like almost like a reality show concept. Like it's not actually fucking ESL1 clone, you idiot. So the players never got it in that sense. And some of them were mad cynical. And the worst part is when I went, if anyone ever watched, you'll notice I wasn't on broadcast for many players. I'd steal. I'd like nothing, who's retired, by the way. Maybe 1 or 2 other pros came. And this is the saddest thing of all. Even though there were some good pros there, all of them basically said, I don't want to go on their couch, because they didn't want to banter and be roasted. Like in that scenario, they felt uncomfortable with that. So it made me realize the vibe in CS isn't StarCraft. So I also think for CS, at least, if that's the background people come from, it just didn't quite work. It did the odd time people like Fallen could carry it because of their charisma, but it didn't get to do what it did in StarCraft. You don't know in StarCraft, it really was actually dope. Like, as in, like the best foreign player might just go out in the group stage and then he'd just be casting the games of like 2 Korean players in the semis. It was like a sort of a phenomena in its own right. So in some ways, I sort of think it's sad that it's went away, but I also think that's the nature, unfortunately, what esports is becoming. It's going to become like the halves are so incredibly up here that if you want to be down here, you're not going to get any trickle down economics of the money anymore. There's nothing in that sense. There's no force anymore of infinite money. You've got to have it crowdsourced. If you can go from the ground up, and by the way, I agree, Richard, you put something like this together that's good, and as the teams that want to take part in my games, CS, etc., league, whatever, if you could do that, I'd pay to do it. If someone was to take my money, please, I would pay to do that. If you hired people like Anders and all the cool people that you want to hear do the casting and stuff, sure.
The other problem, obviously, they had, of course, was the fact that their other big game was Smash, and Nintendo are a fucking nightmare.
Oh, sure.
You know, which
yeah,
is
they
the
basically
other big
like fucked them too, right? They like canceled their
completely.
circuit last minute. So
yeah, we had all that. What was it called? I nearly said Panda Express, but that's the fucking takeaway. But the Panda Gaming nonsense over there. Yeah, I mean, so you know that was another problem as well. I would go so far as to say like maybe an unfortunate game choice, not in the sense of generating content. Smash scene's kind of cool, you know, but I think obviously if you're relying on Nintendo like not shutting you down, and you know they have all these weird stipulations now where it's like you can't have more than like 100 people in attendance, or it's all this gibberish.
Wild.
Yeah, so pretty unfortunate, all things considered. But ultimately, I still believe they could come back and run other games. Anybody could step into the tournament operating space now with just a modicum of expertise, if they could rely on the fact that people were going to pay to watch it. And unfortunately, we don't exist in that world. So until we do, there will be problems.
By the way, I could also see a world. Absolutely. If our company was funded to succeed, this is actually the sort of thing I would like to do. Do a small event like that, have this few select teams, have cool. The actual format is obviously fire if you could pull it off, yeah.
I mean, at the end of look, guys, obviously you had the expertise with fucking Flashpoint. And everybody was like willing that to fail, and then, got the miracle of the pandemic kind of coming in and not to mention teams just being pieces of shit. And it's like, yeah, I mean, obviously, like I don't think you can have too many in the space as long as you know what you're catering to and what the expectations are. And like, now is going to be a really interesting time for Counter-Strike with its open circuit in 2025. And so, yeah, look, I'd love to see more tournament operators coming back to the space. But it's like I say, there just needs to be a sustainable revenue stream there, and that always comes back to the fans who spend just no money on esports products, but will go into a game and buy skins and all this other stuff.
And they'll go on to a stream and spend $5 subscribing to a random streamer or both.
By the way, even though he says he wasn't Neo in the Matrix, the more stories, Phil just is Neo in the Matrix, the first one. Because if you don't know, EG also was one of the teams on the cards to potentially join Flashpoints. There's another massive bullet. It's crazy.
I mean, it's in the nice way, but maybe Phillip's like the Forrest Gump of like esports, in the sense he's always in the right place at the right time for the historic moment. I don't mean you're educationally subnormal. I don't mean that.
Who's that ball guy there? Oh, never mind. Anyway, what was that, Nixon?
Yeah. I mean, you're just always in the historic place at the right time.
I love it.
All right. Any book or movie recommendations similar to Indiana Jones or Disney's Atlantis? So these are like Lost Civilization. Okay. I mean, we've talked about this previously, but The Man Who Would Be King.
Oh, are we talking movies? Did you say?
Movie or book recommendations? Like Man Who Would Be King with
one of my favorite
and Michael Caine.
Love that movie.
Likewise, I fucking love that movie. Movie. It's from the early 70s. If you haven't seen The Man Who Would Be King, also, these are not books, but obviously, if you like Lost Civilization stuff, video games is the obvious answer because Uncharted and the new Tomb Raider games are actually quite good at doing this stuff. So the Uncharted series, the new round of Tomb Raider games has been very entertaining. I love Lost Civilization stuff. I love it. So I would recommend playing games instead. You guys have any other ones?
You go any Phil?
I mean, easy, more modern one, because again, you never know. Viewers, a lot of people are like, they won't watch anything past like earlier than 1980. So if 1975, Man Who Would Be King is too early for you, like The Mummy, if you've never seen it, like the
original one.
The one
with Brendan Fraser,
yeah. It actually just hit 25 years, right?
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Shocking. We are old people. It's crazy. Yeah. But, like that movie, if you're like a Zoomer, like, and you haven't seen that, like that movie rips and is like way better than it like can be, but like good cast, just like it's a good time, you know. Like that's an easy one.
I'm trying to think. Like, interestingly enough, if anyone knows the YouTube channel Bad Movie Bible, they've literally just 4 or 5 days ago put a YouTube video out, which is all of the Indiana Jones B-movie knockoffs throughout the 80s and 90s and noughties. It's an hour long. It goes to all over the world, like, you know, India and Italy and all that stuff.
Oh, right. Okay.
So check that out. Bad Movie Bible is a fantastic book, and the guy who wrote it made like a YouTube channel where it's like all of the terrible like European knockoffs of films that do well. It's called Borrowing Blockbusters is the series, which is also a fantastic name.
The obvious one, he said, like Indiana Jones, listen, I say this with no sense of irony. I am a radical truth teller. The National Treasure series with Nicholas Cage.
I was just thinking about that too.
Actor. That is like, if you actually love like sort of cheesy 90s aesthetics, even those early 2000s, in a movie, like where you just have to suspend disbelief because it's Nicholas Cage being ridiculous. It is so fucking funny because it's not only Indiana Jones shit, it even has shit where like his family's with him while he's trying to do all this. And it's really like, as he actually like talks through all the little things, it's so stupid but funny. Like it will be like, and you will, but Thomas Jefferson had a secret thing, and you're like, oh, what? I mean, yes, he did. Keep going, Nicholas Cage. Keep going. That is, again, it's very silly, but if you just if you can get on the ride, it is fun. That is a fun movie. Absolutely,
100%. The first one is right. First one, The Mummy, that movie, they're both like, they shouldn't work and they do so well. The second one of that series is more Atlantis-like, maybe a little bit down, but it's still like you're hanging with Nick Cage. He can't complain.
Yeah. The Keep.
Oh, The Keep. That one's actually that one's very weird. That one's an interesting one.
I remember watching that as a kid. That was another one of those movies that like
I watched it recently, actually.
Yeah. So that's one. God, there must be loads we're just missing. I mean, like, what about? I mean, the original King Kong has a bit of that. They expand on it in the remake.
Sure, yeah.
The OG, like 1931 King Kong.
Yes, indeed.
That movie is very metal. The acting is not super strong out of the gate, but when they're like trying to cross the like giant log over the chasm, and King Kong just fucking dropping bodies.
Yeah.
Pre-code Hollywood people.
Yeah, bro. Like that was like one of my favorite movies as a kid. My granddad put it on, and I was devastated when King Kong died. Man, I was Team Kong right from the fucking start, bro. Like it was no doubt in my mind. I'm like, yeah, he's totally the good guy. Like, what the fuck is happening? Like, why are you shooting at this dude? You know,
More recently,
but,
I think this was an okay movie that I saw, not great, but if you really are into this genre, The Lost City of Zed was a more recent film.
Yep.
That was interesting.
yeah, that's
I
with thought. Charlie Hunnam, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever his name is from Sons of Anarchy.
It was okay.
I mean, it's based on a true story.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends how far
there
you
is
want to
that.
stretch the premise, because technically, isn't Black Panther about a lost civilization?
Also true.
He's probably the viewer's probably seen Black Panther though.
That's true. Sure, I know they probably have. That's true, actually. Yeah, that's true.
You could go if
I mean, they'd have
somebody's
to
lost
have had that 100% rating on Rotten
Yeah.
Tomatoes that I had for many years.
Yeah. If you also want to get hardcore, you go Gira Wrath of God.
Oh, sure.
Like
That's
that's
a banger.
yeah,
Werner
that's
Herzog,
a banger.
yeah.
Yeah.
Klaus
Yeah.
fucking Kinski. What a man.
Yeah. And at that point, you should really just go into like deranged, like people making movies in the 70s and 80s in like South America. So you should abandon your Lost City requirement and just see Sorcerer 2 like that. You'll have a great
Another good
day.
show.
So
yeah, that's a classic.
might as well be.
Love that.
All right, next question.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see here. If you could do it all over again, do you still get into esports knowing what you know now?
It's the way that they try asking like the question that you would existentially ask yourself on an acid trip for 8 hours. Like, who has an answer to that? Isn't that kind of the purpose of what we're doing now? And doesn't it end with either like committing to esports or pulling out the old Smith and Wesson? I'm just saying.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, saying.
This is the ultimate insidious plot. They're trying to incept, us to off ourselves, right?
By the way, my answer is easy for this one, because the reason why I would definitely say yes is because luckily, since I've actually, once I got to a certain point in the industry, been able to sort of set my own agenda of what work I do and what my hours are, I would say actually, even in the hard times and even the bad things, that sustains me. Like, I always meant work is fun to do. It's something engaging to do. Whereas the difference was I actually was unironically going to try to become like a hardcore computer programmer in like C, which would, by the way, everyone I know who completed those degrees and did that job, it's the most soul destroying job of all time. Like when I met up with some of them like 3 years later, they're the people who had to drink like a bottle of wine every night just to go to bed. Like that sounded like a nightmare. So I don't wish I'd gone that direction whatsoever. I don't know what else I would have done otherwise. So yeah, I'm glad I did it for now. That could be famous last words. We'll see.
Yeah, I always try and think what I would have filled the space with instead. And, there's no easy way to answer that, because obviously now we're talking about, fucking 20 years of life. So what could I have done in 20 years, I mean, like, it sounds insane. I always, because I watch a lot of, like, detective stuff, I always just think, like, I should have...
Richie Gumshoe.
Yeah, exactly.
One last question.
What
was going on with that Samil? What was going on with that
a
Samil
homicide
stock in the end
detective or
anyway?
whatever.
One last
That
question.
would have been... That's the one thing.
I love
Like, if you got a do-over and you could go back knowing all the shit like you keep your brain intact, but you just like rewind X amount of time, I could see myself doing that.
Question is, I have one question about that. One follow-up. Would you actually be like a true blue cop who believed in it all and fought, or would you eventually, listen, happens to the best of us, would you get drawn into that sort of bad lieutenant world of like, all right, well,
I don't know bad lieutenant's the example I would use, because doesn't he like pull over a chick?
Listen, you don't have to
like he's driving drunk and then like jerk off. Like, so no, not that guy. No. Not Harvey Keitel in Bad Lieutenant, no. But no, I know what you mean. Would you be corrupted?
Yeah.
And I think I've done
I've
done a pretty good job of being of like resisting corruption in esports.
Okay.
It's definitely been lots of temptation on the table to take money or endorse things I know are
Listen,
bad.
in esports you have. I will just say though, counterpoint, you do love fucking the Shield, so I'm just going to say.
Yeah, listen. Again,
Do love
Team
the
Vic,
Shield.
the whole time.
There you go. Okay. That might be
Team
an
Vic
answer
the
to
whole
it, guys.
time.
Okay.
So no, I know what you mean. It's like I'm trying to think what the corruption would be, because obviously, my understanding is if you want to go in the UK, if you want to like investigate murders and go to detective rank, you have to spend some time on the beat, and you have to work your way up and do exams and all that stuff. So I don't know. I mean, I have a concept. I can sometimes see myself getting drawn into the eye for an eye justice interpretation. Like maybe there's some people who, whoops, putting a gun in their dead hand, like, oh bloody hell, he shot first. Like, you could maybe for the right kind of scumbag.
Why are you George Lucas greedoing motherfuckers that he shot first? It's like reasonable.
Yeah,
So you
why not?
you don't want to go bad lieutenants, you've gone full touch of evil. Okay, so
Yeah, I'm just saying it would be hard for some type of criminals, like child murderers or whatever. I'm just saying maybe they wouldn't make it in all the time. But yeah, I don't know. I think I'd be all right actually. I think, like, put it this way, like, just in esports, it's like, so in like police work, you're being invited to be corrupt because you don't make enough money, and you're surrounded by scumbags and everyone's doing it on the force or whatever. In esports, all you have to do is just say this skin site is reliable. That's it. And you walk away with hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like, and I never did that. So I think I'd be all right. I think I'd be all right for something a bit more noble.
Would you do it again, Phil?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's just hard to like dial when you've spent this much of your life in something to say like
Right.
what I like. Not doing it again means half of my wedding party I never met. I never got to know. Like, I don't live in the house I'm in. Like, I haven't been to 34 countries. Like, there's just so many like things that are so like core to who I am and like are part of my life today. It's like I would never rewind it. Like, no way. I would have probably been working in politics, I guess, for the last decade, and probably making probably having the same amount of stress for half the money. So so it's like, yeah, no, I'm good. I'm, there's lots of ups and downs and stress, but happy with the experience, and I wouldn't trade the people I got for anything. So.
By the way, Monty, wouldn't you have been some bullshit lawyer or something? Is that what you were trying to do?
No. I definitely wouldn't have done that. Let's be clear. Like, I was working at a law firm, but like I was doing that because it was good money for me just out of college. But basically the reason why I took that job was because it was great money for the time and for my age. And it gave me, honestly, a platform to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And it actually allowed me to, basically stand up some of my own esports sites like GG Chronicle and stuff like that, because I had extra money at the time, which then helped kind of get me into professional esports full time. So that was, I saw the unhappiness at the law firm, even though I had a great job and like I'm not complaining, and I really enjoyed the lawyers I worked with. I mean, when I left to move to Korea and go full time into casting, they literally were like, "Oh, you made the right choice. Like, don't go to law school." And these were lawyers making millions of dollars a year who were very powerful. Hilariously, this is a fun one. I was reading a New York Times article the other day, and the boutique, very small firm that I used to work for is now representing Sam Bankman-Fried on his appeal. So that could have been my life.
See that old history, you there. Sam, is there anything else we need to know before the next trial hearing? No, it's pretty much all checked out. Yeah, feel the shoe to drop. Brilliant.
Because one of the things that one of the partners, there were 4 partners at this firm, so it's a very small boutique firm, did was like very elite white collar criminal defense, and so
just love the idea. No matter what path you take in the butterfly effect, you're still in some sense 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon separation from TSM's failure. How is that your life?
It's weird, right? So I was like, holy shit, when I was reading this New York Times article, because like it's not likely that of all the major, all the law firms, all the lawyers in the world, even though this was a very elite firm, that this little kind of nimble firm would be the one that would be taking this appeal. So anyway, I found that interesting and had a chuckle. So no, I don't think I would have done that. As for what I would have done, I don't know. But would I do it again? Absolutely. Because here's the thing, like, Phil said about the highs. The highs in esports are some of the best highs ever. Like, so, one of the best highs that I ever had in esports was qualifying to the LCS with Renegades. It's an incredible feeling. But it's also, you meet, there are a bunch of shitty people. But
By the
there's
way,
also a bunch
Monty,
of
I
really...
will just say, just for disclaimer, you are literally married to someone you met through esports
Exactly.
and have 2 children.
I was
You can't
getting to
really
that.
say no on this one. You know what I mean? Like, you're so
Yeah,
painted
exactly.
in a corner on this one, mate.
I
Or at least
met
it'd be
my
a hell of a
wife.
heel turn if you said, I'd rather go back and do it all again.
I met my wife in China when we were working at WCG event. So, like, would I go back and change it? No. No. So, and also, I have great friendships with esports. And like I said, I enjoy the projects I work on now. That I'm able to be more independent and not being a caster anymore and beholden to, the shitty people. So yeah, I mean, I would say, would I do things differently? Obviously, I would do things differently, but would I do it again? Sure. Let's take a couple more questions and then we'll end. If you had the power to go back and save or destroy one org from esports history, which would it be and why?
The destroy one. The save one's a good question its own, but just the maliciousness of destroy one. Okay.
I mean, destroying TSM is pretty great. But the save one, come on, guys. I would save my own fucking org. Like, I obviously have the most financial,
All right.
upside to that one.
All right, I'll complete the obvious joke here, which is Richard already destroyed Monty's org, so
That is true.
so
And you know what? Maybe deserved. But I
Okay.
would also, obviously, if I had the power to save it in a way that, could fix the problems that existed, I would do that. Obviously, I wouldn't just save it to save it. I would fix the things that
Okay.
were wrong with it.
One I would save. Who would it be? Who have we
Anybody
lost down?
waiting for you?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, again, Phil's got an obvious answer as well. When you consider the topic of the show.
the only question is, which answer is it? Is it save or destroy? Because we're still not sure on that one. We're kind of in and out. I know, so.
Evil Geniuses is still an organization alive and well in the esports space.
Okay.
Of course it is. Yep.
That's
Also
good.
true. Yeah.
That's what they tell us. They say that they're in Valorant for the passion of the game right now, not because they tried to sell their slot to FlyQuest. And Riot said, "What the fuck, Evil Geniuses? This isn't something you can sell."
All right, even though I'm the esports historian, I don't think there's actually a great answer for this one because a lot of them that went out of business weren't that great or they weren't so iconic necessarily. So I'll just pick a cheesy one, which is I would actually go and revive that Korean StarCraft team, Hwasong Oz, that Jaedong played for,
Ooh,
just because they had really sick jackets, right? And some fucking guy on Team Liquid did one of those things where you agree to pay him like $50 or whatever, and then he's going to do a group buy and get it together. And then it took him 2 years. He never got the fucking jackets, and then at that point in time he had to return the money. He didn't ever get the jacket, and then the fucking team died afterwards. So I don't even want to do it for any other reason. I just want that fucking jacket. I fucking waited 2 years for that jacket so I could look like Jaedong, and I never even got it in the end. So I'd save it just for that reason, so I get the jacket, but totally selfish reason.
I could see myself resurrecting Four Kings.
I mean, the joke
that's
is
a good
you
one.
can do that right now, Richard. You have £100 basically. Like we can get that sorted immediately.
Probably could.
As a Warcraft 3 guy, obviously that's near and dear
It's
to my heart.
iconic, and for the UK, it was our brand. That should have been our SK Gaming, etc. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I'd probably could resurrect Four Kings, destroy. I mean, this is also the funny part. I kind of have destroyed a bunch of orgs.
I was going to say it's not just my org. You are the destroyer of orgs in general. You destroyed I by power.
I'm like Unicron from fucking Transformers the movie. Like, I mean, listen, I kind of feel that NIP could do with it. It'd be a fucking mercy killing at this point. Like, just walk up behind, like, just look over there, Lenny. Just think of the rabbits.
My favorite
Time
part,
fucking
Richard,
go.
was at the end of last year.
We have way too many, references to Lenny on our shows. Just gonna put that
Lenny's the fourth horseman in my mind. He always has been. Every episode ends with us killing him again. That's how it
The
works.
worst low point ever that NIP experienced was last year, where what happened, guys, was they went to a fucking Swedish Cup. Everyone knows there are no Swedish teams, right? Because they had to have like a majority Swedish lineup, they took 2 stand-ins, but they still had like config, etc., by the way, like some actual real known players, Rez and that. And they lost in the semi-finals to like fucking Plopsky, the guy they kicked, and his mates in a smaller team. Like when you're NIP the org and like you can't win local lands, like yeah, at that point in time, it's like Richard says, it's just time to like say goodbye to Grandad and turn off the machine. Let's just give him some dignity on the way out. Give him some
The
dignity.
doctors say there is no brain function. So
I've
time.
got 2 non-EG saves.
come on.
2 non-EG
Okay,
related ones.
Yeah.
First, a Dota related one. I'd like to save Wings, TI6 champions.
Classic.
Oh, that's
If
a
you-
good call.
If you know any history of Dota, no Dota at all, this Wings team in all of my history of esports, the most unique like world champion ever to exist. Just like 5 dudes doing the most random shit you've ever seen. And like our team, I remember sitting preparing for them, and our coach is literally pulling his hair out, being like, I just can't do it. I don't know what they're gonna do.
Yeah.
They're just like they just pick random shit. In the grand finals of TI, game 1, they meme picked 2 random champions for fucking fun in a $40 million tournament or something. They were just absolutely like the most like pure enjoyable team in any game I've ever seen. Just like, I mean, they were all entertainment, all crazy, and their org was trash. And the second TA ended, the org took a bunch of their money and fucked them all over, and it was gone. But I would kill to see that team and that like what they were like at the peak of any game just exist again. So that's number 1. Number 2, I'd like Final Boss back. My earliest esports
the Halo
days.
one.
Yeah. My earliest esports days being a Halo fan and watching on like USA and all these like random places where like tournaments are going on then. Not only was that a legendary team with like Walshy and Ogre and the Ogres and all that sort of stuff, but they had the most fucking, I mean, I love the brand. Like Evil Geniuses, I always loved the brand and the idea of the brand. Final Boss was right there too. They had that like hulking, like, I don't know what this dude, but Atom App hooked me up at MLG New Orleans years back. They were out of the Florida Lee MLG shirt that was like given out at that event, and because in my size, and so he just happened to have a box of Final Boss hoodies, and so I still have a Final Boss hoodie that I wear to basketball all the time to intimidate like freshmen at the University of Washington with, as I like, I'm 6'4", you can't necessarily tell them this, but I'm a big dude, so I always walk around. I love that shirt. I love that brand. It was cool. I wish it was still around.
I guess Activision Blizzard have that now, right?
I guess so. Yeah, probably.
Yeah, because it was MLG owned brand, right? So there. So maybe
I was gonna go with the Huangju charge, but you guys already gave that suggestion, so whatever. It's all good. All good.
All right, we will do 2 more questions and we'll be done. Is there a single moment in time that the Horsemen could travel to fix esports forever?
I would just say my immediate thought answer is actually similar to this discussion. It's basically before every big org, which some of them actually were almost half businesses, half sponsorships, half like activating deliverables. They'd managed their budget up from like hundreds of thousands to millions. They were getting the good deals starting to come in. It's basically just before the franchising period. I actually think franchising was actually the worst thing that ever happened to esports. Because like I say, it made everyone play a game of chicken with infinite VC and then sort of destroyed not only esports, some of the people in it. I don't know what changed about it, but that's the moment for me that was like the Hunter S. Thompson when the wave rolled back, all that jazz, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, tied to this conversation for sure, but I think genuinely similar note, but like rolling back to the day before Alex signed on the dotted line to sell to Twitch.
Right.
Like if you roll back to that point and you do like Christmas past, Christmas present, Christmas future situation with them, and you're like, look at what it will become if you sell and all these other people feel they have to sell, and it becomes a conglomeration. You know, like if you could take that other way, like, you know, Alex was the OGest of the OG and knew how to run it at a grassroots profitably. Like you take him back, you undo that and you leave him and EG in a powerful spot to keep growing in a different way. I think that's maybe our best chance of averting disaster.
Listen, a version of the movie Scrooged with Alex Garfield, seeing what
There it
becomes
is.
of the is a fucking bang.
Directed
That's
by
another movie right there.
the Coen brothers.
And exactly, yeah, it's another movie right there. It's another movie.
I have to go back and say it's the moment in time when Riot decided to make all esports free. Because if we're actually trying to fix or save esports forever, basically by making it pay-per-view and by following the OGN model for League of Legends and the GOM TV model that had existed before that in StarCraft, I think we return the power to the fans who could then vote with, even if we wouldn't have had the same viewership, we would have actually had better monetized viewership. And therefore we wouldn't be in this like VC/Saudi Arabian nightmare scenario that we're in right now, as we desperately hunt for money to prop up the marketing exercises of publishers and developers who don't reveal to anybody how successful these marketing campaigns are. But we have to assume are successful, because otherwise why would Riot do it in Valorant if they were failing with it big time in League of Legends? So if we're talking about fixing esports, that is how you fix esports, is like you never move away from pay-per-view.
Yeah,
by the way, the joke answer, since we said we're saving esports here, would be I need you all to appear. It's sometime around I think it's like December 23rd or something of 2021. And you need to all appear as I'm about to start doing tweets, right? And then you need to be like Dr. Dre in that like Eminem Guilty Conscience video, basically. Where now, wait a minute, Thorin, think about what you're about to tweet. That's all I'm saying. If you go up here there, you would save esports, literally. I mean, I wasn't actually esports at the time, but now that I am, you could have saved me.
I would, for me, I would do a Back to the Future style thing where I stop Mark Merrill and Brandon Beck meeting at university, right? So, like, you know how like Marty McFly almost stops his like dad and mother fucking. I would just be there and stop Brad like, oh Mark, I hear you're really cool, and like, oh, don't hang around with that redheaded guy. He's an asshole, and like, I would befriend Mark Merrill. I would basically, it's like jumping on a grenade. I would do it for everybody else. I'd become Mark Merrill's best friend. League of Legends would never happen, and esports would be saved.
Some strong suggestions there.
Yeah.
All right, last question. We'll end on an optimistic note. What is the brightest shining light in esports currently?
Everybody say it at the same time. 1, 2, 3. Jason Lake. Where were you all at?
I was still thinking.
We're not in a great spot.
Like is a pure soul. It's true.
It is, but that's our future. It's now also our past.
I was going to say the prospect of the American government shutting it all down, but I mean, I don't know. People don't want to come along for that ride. Please get it done. No, on a serious note, I kind of think, honestly, the death of developer curated esports.
Yeah,
the fact that everyone's woke up simultaneously to realize the juice isn't worth the squeeze. And putting
the return to the true open circuit in CS is another interesting one. Now that could turn out disastrously, by the way.
But I think it's going to happen in League. I know people aren't ready for this. I think this whole esports World Cup thing.
Yep.
I think it's going to happen in League, and I think we're going to get back to the IPLs and everything else. I think that's coming, and I we've got it in Overwatch now. Like memes aside, jokes aside, the OWCS is going to be better than the Overwatch League. I mean, the game's dead and shit, and it's never going to be culturally relevant again. But if it's your jam and you love it, you've got a really cool open circuit that you can go and have a tier 3 esports career in, right? So yeah, I think actually the fact that developers have tried to be these like control freaks that they are naturally, and it's backfired spectacularly and cost them money. Also, the Activision Blizzard buyout is just chef's kiss for the industry, because Microsoft conceptualized about esports in a totally different way. And they believe in one-off big spectacles, like how they handle Halo. So, yeah, I actually think that, I rarely say this shit, but I think the future's actually bright for esports. We got what we needed for the industry, because if we continue down this route of games developers being the be-all and end-all, like deities within their own little fucked-up universes, we were going to have a very hard time. The open circuit has always been the answer for esports, and You know, we've proven that by virtue of not having had it for a while, and now everybody is ready to embrace it again.
There's also the truth that the garbage teams that have been propped up by outrageous investment that are never going to return that investment, you know, that attracted a bunch of the esports tourists, people from outside the industry who took positions of power as executives within these companies because they were trying to hop on board the next hot thing. These people will be gone. I mean, many of them are already gone, but they'll be gone soon because they're going to be off to the next grift, right? They'll be tourists somewhere else. And so the return of esports to the OG, like people who actually really care about the stewardship of the space, I think is an encouraging sign. So, I mean, you know, honestly, I think many of us are going to be positive about esports winter because we like the reset button being pushed. Yeah. I wish it was being pushed a lot harder because unfortunately the Saudis are going to prevent the cratering that, you know, we all wish would occur. Like I actually dream of the apocalypse where all of us can just stay in our bunkers and then just emerge into the new world. But the Saudis are actually preventing the apocalypse from taking place, which is annoying. But it's still going to reset a little bit.
I would just say it's what we referenced earlier. I think it is inevitable. One day, this is why also maybe it goes in line with your suggestion. Maybe the developer control has to be released or forced apart from them with some sort of IP rights. One go watch the Hassan, what was his name? Harris, whatever his surname is. Peskin, there you go. That episode about like IP rights, etc. If that ever happens, I think it is inevitable. Someone will finally cut the Gordian knot of pay-per-view and they'll actually make it work again. It'll be good. Because if you look at battle passes, the CSGO stickers, fans will pay. They just have to, here's the problem, without sounding too randy, and you can't make it like an old patronage model. Do it just to support me, which is what people do in tiny communities, like me and Richard, if we have a Patreon or something. You have to do it in a Randian level of like, just to be selfish, tell the Zoomer, you get this cool thing, you get this unique cosmetic, you get this one-time badge, you get an extra cat, whatever you get, right? They will pay for absolute shite in the games and they'll stupid broadcast and sub to people and make a hype train and all sorts of guys. So they will pay you. What you have to do, though, is you have to channel that in a way. Whereas I think people have done it too simply and too black and white before. Like, just pay for this, and it's like they don't know what they're getting and they haven't seen any of it yet. There's no entry point, and why are they paying? And it's just free. Because I have to say, as someone who followed the entire rise of the UFC, there have always been free alternatives, guys, that you could watch like on free American TV or on the internet that was never as good as the UFC, though. Everyone who got into that sport, assuming they didn't use dodgy streams, had to buy the pay-per-view. You just had to eventually. Like, I have the fight pass to this day, so I can watch all the old fights. Like, if you do it right, people will pay. And the second people actually pay, this is the silliest thing about some of the discussions we have about like this evil entity's buying in and what's going on over here. The second the fans pay, we can fund this industry to 100 times the level, 1,000,000 times over. Like there are so many fans at this point in time. I mean, even in the countries where they don't make as much money per person, then they just have bazillions of people like India, like China. So if the fans can ever properly, if you can set up the monetization from the top down, which probably means, unfortunately, get these game devs out of the way because they actively do, like Monty says, come in and go, shut that golden goose down. We don't want that happening. If you ever get that, I actually think that would just be, that would be like a utopia at this point in time. Esports would be amazing. Everything would be possible, seemingly.
Yeah.
What about you, Phil?
I already answered. Jason Lake, everybody.
Right.
I mean, I was having some fun, but I do think that speaks to, and you talked about esports winter being a good thing. Again, I'm on the player side for the PA. You know, we want to see, more importantly than anything, the things that cause us problems are bad ownerships, desperate ownerships who are acting in bad faith because they don't have faith in the thing that we're all here to be a part of. And Jason's and the Hexes of the world, like seeing people who care, OGs becoming back in control of their orgs and having that autonomy brings me a lot of hope that like what's been happening, the pains we've all been feeling the last couple of years are leading to something that has a good light at the end of the tunnel, which is, you know, the people who brought us here kind of getting back in the driver's seat and you know, bringing back the feelings and the way we want the space to be. So that gives me some hope.
But regardless of the shining lights, as usual, we end this show with esports delenda est. See you later for more of the Four Horsemen.